This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Michael Barr on assignment, medicated after that Detroit Lions win.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, he's a big fan out there, so we'll see. But we'll give him
He's out on the West Coast.
We'll give him some
time
time
doing the
off.
Monday Night Football thing.
Yes, he is.
Jets, 49ers.
Yep.
And I just had a call from Mrs. Barr. He's being medicated after that big Lions win last night. We've got a big day here. Market recovery, futures up 40, and the debate tomorrow.
I know.
David Gura leading our coverage.
Exactly. David Gura will be there down in Philadelphia. Great place to have a debate given the history there. I don't know where they get their cheesesteaks, though. That would be one of my questions for each of the candidates. What's your preferred cheesesteak vendor in Philadelphia?
That should be an opening question.
Yep.
I can see that right now. We say good morning, 99.1 FM Washington. Good morning, our flagship station here in New York City, 1130 AM, Bloomberg 1130. Huge signal, reaches out to Buffalo. And 92.9 FM in Boston, a new good morning, a new September. All new in Boston, 92.9 FM on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts out on YouTube. From our interactive broker studios, the Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
Good morning. Futures seen a bit of a rise as September, living up to its reputation as a tough market month for stocks. We had the S&P 500 have fell 4.2% last week. Concerns about the health of the U.S. economy. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said there are no, quote, red lights flashing for the financial system as the U.S. economy makes that soft landing. So we have NASDAQ futures up about 0.8%, Dow futures up 0.6%, S&P futures up about 0.7%. We have the 2-year yield at 3.69%, up 4 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 3.75%, and that's up 3 basis points. Shares of Apple up 0.5% ahead of its annual event today. It's going to reveal the iPhone 16, its new artificial intelligence platform as well. Apple also launching new models of AirPods and the Apple Watch. And we have shares of Boeing up more than 5%. The company reached an agreement with its largest union that includes increasing wages by 25% over 4 years, and also that commitment to build its next plane in Seattle. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo, and that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Joining us now, Andrew Hollenhorst with Citigroup. He has been spectacular on looking for a higher interest rate regime and then coming down. He's looking for a persistency of rate cuts. Do you still live with the persistency of rate cuts?
We do, and I think we feel a lot more confident in that after the jobs report, where we just see a consistent story of a hiring rate that's come down and an unemployment rate that's come up.
What to me is so important here is the study of the complete economy. Can you look at the complete American economy, or is it so polarized you got to look at it as lump, the haves, the have-nots?
There is a big disconnect right now. I think it is historically large between those with high incomes, those with high net worth. Just think how different the experience is if you're a homeowner and you have a low fixed rate mortgage versus
Paul,
a renter.
you're at 2%, right?
Oh, gosh, no. I'm waiting to refi, but don't worry. I'm on it.
I just want to get him going on a
exactly.
Monday.
So, Andrew, talk to us about this labor economy. Tom and I had a really interesting series of guests on Friday when this data came out, and I guess the two theories were, hey, 4.2, 4.3%, that's good. Unemployment, that's fine. But no, if you look at the recent trends, they're going the wrong way. How do you look at it?
Yeah, I think if you just focus on 4.2% unemployment, that's not a bad unemployment rate if we could just stay at 4.2%. The problem is, like you're saying, all of the evidence is that unemployment rate is going to continue to move higher, and it may move higher in a non-linear way. I think that's a real concern. There's been a lot of focus on the idea that, well, the hiring rate's come down, the layoff rate hasn't come up yet. And the yet I would emphasize, because in every cycle, that's what we see. The hiring rate comes down, then the layoff rate comes up, and that's when you get that nonlinearity.
So that goes to then the consumer. I'm not sure how to view the consumer. The consumer, on one hand, we've got the consumer wants a job, they have a job, and wages are going up, so that's good. However, you could argue that there's a lot of economic data suggesting the consumers may be stressing a little bit more than we think.
That's usually going to be the last thing to slow down, so I wouldn't really look at that as the forward-looking indicator of where the economy is going. But you're absolutely right. Savings rate is low. People are spending. Again, the concern is that as the unemployment rate rises, does that start to change that behavior? Do people say, I'm not going to spend that extra dollar, I'm actually need to save a little bit more? And as that savings rate begins to rise, consumption falls.
Andrew Hollenhorst with us with Citigroup. We will continue. Thrilled to tell you that French Hill will join us, the congressman from Arkansas, on this week of debate. We'll have that for you here in a bit. Andrew, I want to talk about the unemployment rate. I think even the most unsophisticated understand when it gets going, it gets going. Can you frame out a 5% unemployment rate?
It's not hard to get there, Tom. If you just look at the trend that we've been moving up, we've been up about 0.1 percentage point per month. So if you think about the remainder of this year, we should be at 4.6, 4.7 if you just followed that trend. And again, you don't have to have a PhD in economics to look at the chart of the unemployment rate and see once it starts moving up, it usually accelerates higher. So I would think 4.6, 4.7 is maybe the lower end of where we'll get to this year.
Does that change the thinking at the Fed? Is 4.9? Come on, in our world, you know, Lisa goes to Costco and it's $29.99 for 400 pounds of strip steak. And that's different than $30. Is 4.9 different than 5.0 to Fed PhDs?
This is definitely affecting thinking at the Federal Reserve at this point, where there is this awareness that you could have this sharp weakening of the labor market, is how Chair Powell talks about it. And I think we're moving from this discussion around should the Fed be preemptive, should they be cutting rates for insurance reasons, to do they just need to act now because we've already seen enough? And that's kind of where Waller was in his speech, where he, before he was talking about we still have time, we should be patient. Now it's a call to action.
So put all that into your blender. What's the economic outlook? What's the GDP call for Citi these days?
So GDP has been holding up surprisingly well, and I think that's kind of the tension in the economy right now, is we have these signs of weakness in the labor market, but consumer spending has been holding up. We think that broadly this economy is going to slow down. We think we should be seeing growth rates below potential, possibly negative growth rates as we move forward. Again, that would be consistent with a sharp weakening in the job market, which we haven't seen yet.
Where's nominal GDP?
Great question, and we shouldn't forget about...
Can I go home? Okay, I don't care about French Hill. I'll go home.
We should
It's
not...
my one great question of the week.
Not forget about the price element here, right? Is that we've had prices that have been rising very rapidly. The last quarter or so of data, we're at closer to a 2% underlying inflation rate. So I think underlying inflation now, getting back towards that 2% rate, that should be where we're running over the next few months at least. You add that to a real growth rate that is sub 2%. So we're getting back to much lower nominal growth rates where these have been very elevated.
Tie that in. One final question. Tie that into Citigroup securities analysis. All of a sudden, revenue growth is hard to get, right?
Yeah, so this could become really a challenge for firms where you've seen these labor costs that have come up. That's how they're reacting in terms of trying to cut those labor costs by hiring less aggressively.
Are you going to watch the entire debate?
I'm going to watch the entire debate.
There we go. Andrew Hollenhorst, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. Chief Economist for Citigroup for these parts of the United States, from sea to shining sea. Futures up 40 now, up 38. Nice lift to the market. Some authenticity to it. VIX in a point, 21.06. And I think that's a key determinant in this ugly September. I got a VIX out to 21 where Paul enjoyed it well above a 60 during the early moments of August. It's not the same, Paul. I mean, I'm sorry. The VIX here is in no way, shape, or form what you experienced with that meltdown in August.
No, we had a VIX. Remember that VIX popping up over 60, Tom. So here we are. We're more reasonable 21 level. It's not mid-teens, but we're better.
It's really important. I can't say enough about using, say, Wikipedia to look at the past, like the presidential election of 2020. Joining us now, a congressman from a safe state for Republicans, Arkansas. French Hill joins us quickly here. So thank you so much for stopping by.
Tom, great to be with you.
Congressman. I see the percentages, and I think there's various Trump voters in Arkansas this morning. Now, out there, a really ugly weekend. I think Ian Bremmer has the president saying he's going to jail Democrats. I don't want to get into the silliness.
I thought you were
of
talking
this.
about the OSU Razorback game.
No,
Sorry.
no, yeah, that was painful too. But French, I want to talk about the different flavors of Republicans and how they're adapting to the rhetoric of their candidate into this debate.
Well, it's important to know that I think, in my view, President Trump stands for the mainstream of Republican thought on economics: lower regulatory costs, lower taxes that promote economic growth, and that he uses tariffs in his speech. He was off on it in a big way yesterday as a cudgel to bring countries that do not have fair trading practices with the U.S. or lack market access for U.S. products and services to the table. But rhetorically, it's his top international economic issue, which is, you could say, inconsistent with long-term Republican economic philosophy, but not when you look back, say, at the Reagan administration.
I mean, the fact is, the news of the week, and Paul, the New York Times Siena poll, I think a lot of people are like, wow, this guy still has a popular vote and clearly electoral vote momentum going. Does he move to the middle with a rhetoric I'm seeing out there?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. No, I think and this has been very consistent, I think, with President Trump. He sticks with this messaging that he has, that he believes so strongly in, and I don't see him moving it. And I think some would argue that Vice President Harris is moving to the middle with some of her proposals, but they're like from the most radical left fringe to slightly less left, not per se to the middle. She uses a lot of press release buzzwords, child care, lowering taxes for working families and things like that. But when you get into the details, I don't think so.
What do you expect to hear from both candidates tomorrow in this debate? Because it may be the only debate.
Yeah, which is not good. I support, obviously more debates, but with early voting, the way we have it in our country now, both campaigns have to get on with it. And I think obviously that President Trump probably wishes that he had a later debate with President Biden and make that knockout punch much later.
But if I go out Route 287 and I go up Highway 65, I go past Twin Groves, Damascus, this is your territory. Are they going to turn out for Trump?
They're going to turn out for Trump. In Damascus, Arkansas, and Faulkner County. Trump, you see Trump signs and Trump banners up and down that highway and across my district, particularly in the rural areas. Trump, for them, speaks about this issue of more opportunity for manufacturing jobs, working people in America, and that he's got their back. And that is a message that delivers.
What would be your question to Vice President Harris in this debate as a Republican away from the MAGA tone?
Do you support policies that actually promote economic growth in cutting regulatory expenses? And what is the right corporate tax rate? And do you think that investments deserve a between 28 and 44% capital gains tax rate? And ask her to explain what an unrealized gain is, actually. I'd like to know her if she understands that math.
So what do you expect? What would you think Vice President Harris needs to do at her debate tomorrow night? What does she need to do?
Well, I think you're right, Paul, thinking she needs to look like she's centrist, that she's not Bernie Sanders, that she's somewhere to the far right of Bernie Sanders, that she is smart and she's up on the issues, and that she's got a sense of humor, but looks presidential. I think it's a big lift for her, but I think that's the main issue for her.
Was the major mistake of Biden from sea to shining sea? Forget about, Paul, the states, New York, Massachusetts, Illinois, where President Biden was getting 60, 70% of the vote, whatever. But was the major mistake is he couldn't run to the center, that he ran to the left?
I think so.
Governed to the left?
I think President Biden said, I'm going to be a better voice. I'm not Trump, and that I'm a common sense, practical guy from Scranton, but he governed as if he was Bernie Sanders and that left agenda of Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders. And he didn't make any reach to the center, actually. Maybe you could say he did in the bipartisan infrastructure deal, but not much.
The core question is a president. When you look at the language of President Trump on Twitter, people will take him verbatim, what he's saying. I'm going to be honest, it's to the edge of incoherent. Can he move? Does he have the ability to move to the middle of the GOP, or is he just going to stay for 4 years on MAGA?
I think he's going to stay where he is. I mean, I think that's the Trump. I think that's Trump.
So, I mean, that's Trump. Is that the Republican Party? Seriously,
Well, look,
is that your Republican Party?
let me go back and say, though, on regulatory budget, having Elon Musk head of a commission to use AI and technology and blockchain to reform the federal government, that's a good idea. That's a Peter Grace good idea. Having lower taxes that don't penalize investment in this country,
Right.
don't penalize, those are good ideas.
Okay, and I mean, Arkansas can't play football, but do you really want to get rid of the Department of Education?
I think Republicans have campaigned on removing the Department of Education since Jimmy
Fair.
Carter created it.
Fair. French Hill, thank
stuff.
you so much.
Great to be with you,
Short
Tom.
visit
Paul, good to
today.
be with you.
Look forward to seeing you. We'll see you again post-debate.
Yeah,
We'll
exactly.
do that. French Hill, the 2nd District in Arkansas, greatly appreciate that this morning. We have debate coverage, and of course we'll do that. This is the ABC News presidential debate. It begins tomorrow night at 8, Wall Street time, a special edition of Balance of Power with David Gura driving our coverage in Philadelphia as well. We need a Bloomberg Business Finance with futures up 42. From the Interactive Broker Studio, Lisa Mateo.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer focuses the power of their thinking on you, creating customized plans to help achieve your goals. Put the power of Oppenheimer thinking onto your investing. Call an Oppenheimer professional today. All right, looks like stocks staging this partial recovery after that sell-off triggered by cooling U.S. jobs data. Left traders wondering how aggressively the Federal Reserve is going to cut interest rates. This week, we have more data on tap, focus on the cost of living. We have the Consumer Price Index on Wednesday. We'll also get a report on producer prices Thursday and import prices on Friday. It all comes ahead of the Fed's meeting on interest rates next week. Right now, we have NASDAQ futures up 0.9%, Dow futures up 0.6%, S&P futures up 0.7%. The 2-year yield 3.69%. That's up 4 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 3.75%, and that's up 3 basis points. Companies making news. Yeah, Big Lots. It is official. We've heard it before, but now it's official. A discount retailer filed for Chapter 11, plans to sell its assets, ongoing business, to Nexus Capital in a court-supervised process. And then Couche-Tard told 7 and I that it wants to work together to agree on a, quote, friendly takeover. Right now, Couche-Tard up nearly 2% in Canada. We have 7 and I up about 2% in Japan. And finally, the Wall Street Journal says Elon Musk's XAI, it's discussed a deal will itward get some Tesla revenue in exchange for providing the car maker access to its technology and resources. Kind of interesting there. Tesla up about 2%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Paul Sweeney, does Elon Musk have too many irons in the fire? How does he focus?
I don't know.
on-
He's maybe he doesn't sleep.
You know what he's doing. I just don't.
He's got a
know.
lot going on there.
Right now, in well time, Mark Howard joins us with BNP Paribas here to frame out where we head now. Mark Howard, do you begin with the idea that the turmoil of September is different than the turmoil of early August?
Good morning, Tom. Paul, thanks for having me. I think the turmoil in August was a shot across the bow, was a wake-up call to expect some turmoil in September and October. The primary driver in August, I think, was around the Fed and the uncertainty that was lurking ahead of Jackson Hole. Now that's pretty well anticipated. I think most people are looking for 25, some are looking for 50. Either way, it's not going to be a big shock. The bigger change is investor attention is turning towards the election, the stuff you were just talking about with Representative Hill.
BNP Paribas has had a more cautious view on equities. It's participate, but participate with caution. Do you maintain that?
Yes, my good friend Greg Bowdle is driving the call there in the U.S., and we currently expect to end of year around 5,400. So not a lot of no meaningful upside from here. In fact, we wouldn't be surprised to see a little bit more price action like last week, where we see some pullback as September and October play out. And I think Greg would be most aggressive at dipping his toe in, at that time.
So, you can see here at a 2-year Treasury at 3.7%. What do you tell clients that are thinking about, should I take credit risk or not? What do you tell them these days?
We're comfortable with the fundamentals, Paul. We're comfortable with valuations. We think there's a little bit better time to go max long or to be aggressive probably in the October time period, or perhaps even a little bit later, depending on just how the rhetoric picks up. But we're not bearish by any stretch of the imagination. And you saw last week, gargantuan supply. Investors are not bearish. Leading investors are out saying this is a Goldilocks period for fixed income, and I think that includes credit. But we just don't think you should chase it in here.
What about cash? I mean, I haven't heard enough about cash. Was Paul cash still giving me 5%? The answer is yes.
Close to it. I don't know.
You know,
pretty good.
Pretty darn good. But I'll be honest. Guest to guest, conversation to conversation we have, I'm not hearing that much about cash. Are you building cash?
Well, if you're triple levered, Tom, then it's a different story.
It's unbelievable. I had an 80-20 payout this year on it. It was just killer. But continue.
I don't think I think cash is a viable parking place, which it wasn't before, for many years. But I don't think a significant allocation of cash is what most investors, particularly institutionals, I don't speak with individuals that much, but institutionals are keeping a relatively slim margin in cash in order to facilitate rebalancing or pouncing on opportunities like we had in August.
So, senior multi-asset specialist at BNP Paribas, what are the assets that are most attractive to you guys these days?
Well, they're kind of more sleepy longs, like the high yield market, for example, which continues to generate good carry and good return in a generally benign fixed income backdrop, and so that's one area where we've been constructive. Currently, we prefer the leveraged loan market to the high yield bond market in the U.S. European high yield is actually reasonably attractive too, both on an absolute and a relative basis. There are obviously stories around the emerging markets that can be interesting at times, both in the currency and in the debt and equity.
China, though, what do you do with China? What do you tell your clients on China these days?
I'm not a China expert. But it is something where we think.
But let's be clear: BNP Paribas Paris has a multi-decade relationship with Beijing. I mean, it's extraordinary.
Absolutely, and I think that market has struggled. There's been a lot of fundamental stress. There's been some political uncertainty, but frankly, we think equities are going to do okay in China over the remainder of this year. We see them as one of the better performing equity markets.
Why do you say that?
Well, we think A, it's been beaten down. B, we think the fundamental story is priced in, and C, we think other markets are going to struggle and people are going to be reaching for other trade ideas.
Mark Howard, BNP Paribas, with us. Centered around the Fixed Income Hall of Fame recipients this year. Ed Hyman was in the studio Friday. A guy named Milken and Goodkin, giants of fixed income as well. We just lost a giant, Jack Melvey. I want you to explain to people, in the passing of Jack Melvey, his research style. And what I remember is at Lehman, your world stopped and you had to read his report. Why?
Jack was an incredible practitioner. I like to say that he was, he was intense, he was innovative, but he had great integrity, and he always focused on impact. He would collaborate. He would bring experts in. So he'd bring in Howard from credit. He'd bring in Mattis from economics. He'd bring in the mortgage guys, all the rest, and bring us all in and piece together the narrative, including equities, and incorporate that into a global and especially a U.S. fixed income view. And what was really different with Jack from other strategists and what made him stand out is that he also understood the mind of the client. He was the pioneer in fixed income indices and integrated indices with analysis in a way that no other strategist could do.
Well, the Bloomberg Total Return Index. Yep. Can we say Jack Melvey invented or helped invent the Lehman indices?
He invigorated it, Tom.
I like that. I like that.
He didn't invent it. Yeah. He wasn't there for the early days, but he tirelessly ran around the world, worked with major institutions in Singapore and the Netherlands, and everywhere to make that the standard. And what's fascinating about it, Tom, is that out of the embrace of traditional cash indices, grew the passive market and ultimately the
Right.
systematic
Well,
market.
on behalf of Tom Secunda and Mike Bloomberg, all I can say is thank you. The Lehman Index is the foundation of what is the Bloomberg set of total return indices right now that I use each and every day. They show a recovering bond market. Mark
they do.
Howard
Yep,
nailed
got
that
green there.
call. Mark, thank you from BNP Paribas there on their view forward, and also on the great Jack Melvey. Paul, futures up 41. Nice start to Monday.
Nice start to Monday, Tom. Future S&P up 41, the Dow up 280 points, the Nasdaq up 0.9%. That's 165 points here, Tom. And looking at the yields, just a little bit of a lift there. The 10-year Treasury lifting about 4 basis points, 3.75 on your 10-year Treasury, Tom. But oil, it's up a little bit this morning, but still, just sitting around $68 a barrel for WTI crude oil.
Tomorrow night, we're centered on this. David Gura, very busy down in Texas. He bought a Stetson.
Did he?
Yeah, cowboy.
Oh, right.
Gura's,
player.
it's like he's a player. He was down there with Janet Yellen. Of course, an important conversation over the weekend. We'll have Mr. Gura in with us today, and then he goes to Philadelphia for the debate, the coverage of the ABC News presidential debate. It begins tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Joe Matthew, Kaylee Lines, Balance of Power with David Gura in Philadelphia. Futures up 41, the VIX 20.94. Good morning. Good morning, Boston 92.9 FM. Good morning, YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts on YouTube. Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures on the rise, and this is after a rough week of losses. Right now, NASDAQ futures up 0.9%, Dow futures up 0.7%, S&P futures up 0.8%. The two-year yield at 3.69%, that's up 4 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 3.75%, and that's up 4 basis points. To currencies, the dollar stronger. Japanese yen down 1% at 143.79 against the dollar. We have the euro, British pound weaker. Bitcoin up more than 1.5% at 55,000. Moving the markets, Summit Therapeutics, they're up 35%. The latest data of its lung cancer drug, will it show that it beat Merck's Keytruda in a progression-free trial? Merck shares down more than 1%. And shares of Palantir Technologies, Dell Technologies, Erie Indemnity, they are higher before the bell. And this is after it was announced those stocks will be added to the S&P 500 before the start of trading on September 23rd. Palantir up 8%. We have Dell up 5%, Erie up 2%. And finally, Trump Media and Technology up 6%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Hey, Lisa, thanks so much. We'll get to Henrietta, Treyz in a moment. Paul, I just saw you on the break with your kids negotiating who gets the iPhone first.
Oh, boy. I am front
Are you
of the
buying
line.
3 or 4?
No, I'm buying 1 for me. I'm looking out for me. I'm number 1. But I've got the iPhone 11. I mean, it basically flips open, so I need to step up here a little bit.
It's a little, and you dropped it 6 times in a bar.
Exactly.
So, there you go. Dan Ives to join us here on the Big Apple soiree. Of course, Bloomberg Technology, Caroline Hyde, and Ed Ludlow leading our coverage there today. On the debate, Henrietta Treyz, Veda Partners. Henrietta, is there any indication the Democratic candidate can move to the center?
Hey, guys. I think that Kamala Harris's own website that was just updated overnight contains a number of policy positions that are a shift from her prior position. She's bringing the capital gains rate down to 28%, for example. She's got the corporate tax rate set at the same level that Barack Obama and Joe Biden both had at 28%. I think the more interesting question is what can actually get done, and all those numbers will have to come down next year if Kamala Harris is president and she wants to get a bill through the House and Senate. So I am encouraging investors to sort of look ahead to who's on the member which committees to see that it'll be a 25% corporate rate max, and that's sort of where we are.
So this is your wheelhouse. Do you just assume there's gridlock next year?
Well, there can't be gridlock. That's the only good news we have. They have to have a bill next year. It'll take all year to get done. I think that's underappreciated by the market right now. I think people think that, one party comes into control, snaps their fingers, and we have a tax bill. It's not going to get written until December 17th, December 22nd. Those were the last dates of the last 2 tax bills. It'll take all year.
Wow. Okay. So let's focus on good news. I mean, that's just politics, I guess. Tomorrow night, what's the most important, I guess, swing factor for you tomorrow night? I guess is the risk primarily for Vice President Harris that she needs to either make it or break it tomorrow?
Yeah, one of the candidates is going to, I think, very likely have something that gets blown out of proportion and changes the narrative, mostly because the American public, the media landscape demand that right now. The race is neck and neck in every single swing state and nationally. So we are primed, just as we were for Joe Biden to drop out, we are primed for a major event from this debate because there are no external catalysts to come hereafter that anybody can predict. We will potentially get an October surprise, but this debate, which is probably going to be the last debate, is the only thing standing between now and the election.
So how aggressive does Vice President Harris need to be to maybe make a positive break?
I think everybody's going to come in pretty hot. I think they're eager to be on the same stage together. It'll be their first time. I would not be surprised if there are fireworks tomorrow.
What do you? What's a win for former President Trump tomorrow? Because I think obviously the electorate is fully aware of Mr. Trump. But what would be a win for him? I guess.
A win for Trump, I think, would be able to focus on policy, really speak to suburban, female, married voters. Those are a demographic that he needs to win the election and is where he's materially underwater. Right. If Kamala Harris could speak to that same demographic as well and give a presentation of the top things that really resonate with voters from her perspective, things like, the future of democracy and specifically abortion. She's up by something like 47 points with female voters in the under 35 cohort. So she doesn't really need to get those people on board with her any further than they already are. But both Trump and Harris need to speak to the middle, but then they also need to energize their voters. I think anything where Trump does not say something against early voting would be helpful. He really needs to help the Republican machine encourage early voting, which is something he keeps denigrating.
Right. She's in major preparation in Pittsburgh. Okay, fine. Is President Trump in major preparation? Is he going to go in and completely ad lib it in an ad hoc way? Or is he going to be more organized than what his supporters and others have seen over the last number of days and weeks?
I wouldn't expect a lot of organization. I mean, we just had this movie in June. It was a high stakes debate between Trump and Biden in June. And I think what we saw from former President Trump was a very ad hoc sort of fact-free approach to having a conversation with Biden that ultimately was wildly successful and got Joe Biden off the ticket. But if you read any of the commentary that Trump put out there, talking about Democrats supporting killing babies after birth that's not true. So there were a lot of things that I think Kamala Harris could try to seize on if the tension isn't the way it was during the first debate. And we just saw that. And I think that Trump would be well served to sort of focus on some policy platforms and get that out there again to speak to that suburban voter.
Henrietta, we keep hearing more and more, I guess, over the last 3-4 election cycles about just these handful of swing states. How did we get here? Because I don't remember growing up with 6 states determining the presidential election seemingly every cycle.
Well, it really has always been that way. We have the Rust Belt, and the states shift every once in a while. Arizona, for example, never used to be in the conversation. Florida used to be in the conversation. Colorado used to be in the conversation. So the states themselves shift, but you always have these 6 or 7 that are deciding the electorate. I forget exactly what the number is, but 40 states consistently vote red or blue, going back to at least the last couple of decades.
I'm looking at the Twitter feed, all heated up. We had French Hill on, of course, from Arkansas, to be polite, a safe state for Mr. Trump. Henrietta Treyz, what is the ability of a hunk of this debate, or the whole debate, to just sit on the border question? I mean, that is in President Trump's advantage, isn't it? How does Vice President Harris amend the border question?
Yeah, I think for Donald Trump, you would definitely want to stay on the issue of immigration, of crime. Those are areas where the Republican candidate far exceeds Kamala Harris in terms of voter perception. The priority for Harris, I imagine, would be to speak facts to the last 9 months of the decline in immigration at the southern border as a result of Biden's executive orders. She's going to face charges that she was late to this and that for 3 years they sort of sleepwalked through a problem. You're certainly going to hear that commentary echoed from the governors of Texas and other states that are on the border. If Trump could hammer that home, I think it would really help. It does resonate with voters. It is the second highest issue after the economy outside of protecting democracy, and it's followed by abortion. So those 2 issues, immigration and abortion, I think are major priorities.
Henrietta, what happens after tonight? What did the 2 campaigns do as they sprint towards Election Day?
Good question.
Spend money left and right. I mean, we are doing ad campaigns everywhere. The Harris campaign has an ungodly sum of money to spend. I think it's something like $270 million in ads that they've already bought along the 7 states that you just mentioned. So for anybody who lives there, get used to seeing their faces. But early voting started, it's off and popping now. We're doing it.
Henrietta, thank you so much. Look forward to speaking to you after the debate. Henrietta Treyz, Veda Partners, just a huge help to Team Surveillance here. Again, David Gura in Philadelphia with Balance of Power. That coverage tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Futures up 37, Dow futures up 259. Good morning on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Thank you so much for that. With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
All right, Tom, Paul, and Lisa. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris heading into tomorrow night's debate with the latest New York Times Siena College poll showing Trump ahead by just 1 percentage point among registered voters. Meantime, Nikki Haley was the last Republican to challenge Trump in the primary. She says Harris is vulnerable tomorrow night.
You look at Kamala Harris, and it's quite remarkable. She never had a debate. She never had a primary. She never had anyone vote for her. And they basically took her, and in 48 hours, they put her back out there, and she was this whole new candidate.
Nikki Haley was on CBS's Face the Nation, which can be heard Sundays on Bloomberg Radio. Following the debate, Harris plans to travel to key battleground states, including North Carolina, on Thursday. Our coverage of the ABC News presidential debate, that begins tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Wall Street time, on a special edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio as well as Bloomberg TV. Republican lawmakers accusing the Biden administration of lying to Americans and sacrificing the safety of U.S. soldiers during the 2021 Afghanistan withdrawal. The accusation comes in a report that seeks to implicate Vice President Harris before the election. It says President Joe Biden's team misled and, in some instances, directly lied to the American people at every stage of the Afghanistan withdrawal. A gunman killed 3 Israelis at a terminal on Jordan's border with the Israeli-occupied West Bank on Sunday. It's the first such incident since the Gaza war began in October, straining ties between the Jewish state and Jordan. Israel's army said the gunman accessed the Allenby Bridge crossing, also known as the King Hussein Bridge, from the Jordanian side in a truck, and then fired shots before he was killed by Israeli guards. And finally, a good Samaritan with a familiar name helped save a choking man at the Hampton Beach lobster roll eating competition in New Hampshire Sunday. Governor Chris Sununu was at the event. He says he was the first to notice a contestant was having trouble breathing. The governor performed the Heimlich maneuver before first responders took over and helped free the stuck piece of lobster.
He went right back to the contest, which I couldn't believe. He ate another 7 lobster rolls after that, right down the gullet.
Governor Sununu speaking there to WMUR. And my reporting also reveals it was not David Gura who was choking. Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg.
John Tucker, thank you.
Oh,
Greatly appreciate
Lisa.
it. Again, futures up 38. Paul, we got to talk about this. I mean, the big football teams line up weak, game 1, game 2 opponents, and money's involved.
I think so.
Like a big payday.
Yep.
And if you're, this is, alumni stuff, and everybody goes out. So you're in South Bend, Indiana, and Northern Illinois shows up. They're like in a real conference.
Yeah.
They're not like in the Big Ten.
No, but
from sea to shining sea.
No, but actually they came up ranked 25th nationally this week on the back of their defeat of Notre Dame over the weekend.
But that's very cool.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I mean, I can just see the athletic directors on the phone 2 years in advance.
Right.
Yeah, well, we'll have you in early September 2000.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, we'd love to have you. Boom. and there it is.
Yep.
Congratulations. That's just what it's all about.
Right.
But Duke snuck by.
Oh, yeah.
I saw.
Yeah, we're in good shape. We're 2-0. Yeah, no problem.
Destined or something like
Penn
that.
State. For Rich Truman, Penn State, another win.
Another win.
They're 2-0.
They're destined as well.
Yeah, Rich Truman's favorite coach.
I can't keep track of it. All I know is the Giants lost.
Oh, boy.
That's, what I know. Where's Michael Barr? Michael Barr, Monday Night Football. He'll be there. 50-yard line. He's up about 14 rows.
He's celebrating the Detroit win.
Yes,
All week. Yep. That's an all-week celebration.
Yeah, I think he was like medicated or, in some form. But he'll be at Monday Night Football.
Santa Clara, which is probably 45 minutes south of San Francisco. I mean, it's not San Francisco. So if you're in the northern part of San Francisco, you're a fan up there in Mill Valley or Sausalito, you've got a huge drive. It's like people from Long Island
to see 49ers football.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
It's a great stadium, phenomenal stadium, but it is nowhere near San Francisco.
Good morning to Michael Barr. I'm sure he's listening at 3:43 a.m. San Francisco time. We thank you for listening at 7:43 Wall Street time. Good morning, 99.1 FM Washington, 11:30 a.m. and our flagship New York City. Good morning, Boston, 92.9 FM as well. Futures up 38. The VIX comes in a stick, 21.05. From New York City on YouTube, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures on the rise as stocks try to gain back some of its recent losses. Right now, NASDAQ futures up about 0.7%. We have Dow futures, S&P futures up about 0.6%. The 2-year yield at 3.69%. That's up 4 basis points. We have the yield on the 10-year 3.75%, and that's up 3 basis points. To commodities, we have spot gold higher, $2,498 an ounce. We have Brent crude, $71 a barrel. WTI crude, $68 a barrel. Nvidia looking to pare back some of its recent losses. Right now, its shares up more than 1%, but analysts at Citi, they are still warning that the artificial intelligence fueled winning streak is coming to an end. And finally, PayPal, it's teamed up with Shopify to process some of the payment company's debit and credit card transactions. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. So I actually thought of this, and all the work's been done for me by Jacob Feldman, Sportico, the business of sports.
Yep.
It costs $788 to watch every NFL game on my TV. Vet Bill wanted that, and I said, I don't think we can do it.
No.
What happened? Remember,
I don't know.
It used to be on CBS and NBC, and ABC had Monday Night Football with Howard Cosell.
Now they've sliced.
And it didn't cost a dime.
No, now they've sliced and diced it a million different ways. And if, in fact, you want to watch every single game, and I guess there are people who want to do that, it's going to cost you. You can do it, is the good news. The bad news is...
What do you have at home for this?
I'm still paying Brian Roberts at Comcast. I'm still paying him every month.
Oh, okay.
That's it.
You're the last person.
I'm the last person.
That.
Exactly.
Lisa, do you guys watch a lot of football at home?
Oh, yes. Yesterday was a long day. But we do it on the cable. We have cable just because of sports. That's the reason why I pay for cable, yes.
I have it, and then no one watches it. So I get rid of it.
Right.
That's all there is to it.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
Yeah, the front pages. I looked at the Boston Red Sox. They're destined. The front pages, they're brought to you by the Lisa Mateo Hour, brought to you by IBKR Financial Advisors. Switch to Interactive Brokers for lowest cost. Global trading and turnkey custody solutions. No ticket charges, no conflicts of your interests at ibkr.com/RIA. Lisa, what do you got?
All right, this is Paul. I know you love a good steak, right? Good source of protein, vitamins, minerals. It's last night. I had one too on the grill. There you go. Yep. You're not alone. American men are actually eating more food in the meat, poultry, eggs category. But you knew that word was coming. But it's a little bit more than federal guidelines recommend. Eating too much, especially processed red meat, sliced ham, bacon, linked to health problems. You know that, heart disease, stroke. The reason why, though, the Wall Street Journal is saying this is happening is because of that rise in protein diets, keto diet, carnivore diet. I'm not sure if that's your reason for indulging. I
Once
think
a month, maybe I'll throw a
it.
steak on the grill.
Okay, so that's the thing. You're in the right category. Here's another thing. Experts are saying men associate meat with strength and power, so maybe that's why they like it a little bit more than women do. Men
New
go
York
to
City
steakhouse.
Yep.
See, it's a guy thing.
Along the same route, in Barron's, I saw this. Neil Templin. Good morning, Barron's. Love looking at you.
Yep.
Saturday mornings. Doctors and health experts are changing their minds about whole milk in cheese. Would they just make up their minds? I think like on butter or milk, we've gone like back and forth.
On the
for
6th
50
floor of
years.
Bloomberg, there's like 27 different varieties of milk.
Yes.
But the reality is, you get whole milk from a cow. Everything else just...
Yeah, it
Come on.
gets confusing because there's so many different kinds. And do you go whole milk? Do you go the 2%?
course
Do you go the 1%?
So we're all dying to know at Costco.
Yes.
When you get the 3 carts lined up, which milk is in the Mateo?
We do the
house?
lactate.
Oh, I feel so sorry for the Mateo people household.
Children, it's just
the poor
abuse.
children. I'm thinking about the children.
It's a great. I got to read this article. Neil Templin, thank you for that from Barron's. Next, what do you got?
This was in Screen Time. This one I point out because the number of of people who pay for some kind of TV bundle, we were just talking about this, is falling, down by 4 million so far this year. This is according to an investment research firm, and that includes YouTube TV. So media executives are saying that a certain share of the population is going to continue to pay for the channels, like the older folks, and yes, me, who has to do it for the sports things for the hubby. But today you can watch, NFL on Peacock, Paramount Plus, Amazon. So it's this whole, back and forth with this as well. We also mentioned YouTube. So Nielsen saying Americans spent more time watching YouTube on their TV sets in July than all of the networks and streaming services owned by Walt Disney. So it's just an interesting kind of perspective to see where things are headed. And where it will go from here.
Where is it in 2 years, Paul? 3 years, 4 years? The trend just continues.
The trend continues. I guess there's some floor for people like me, a certain demo. Was that 40% of households as opposed to 80% of households that paid for TV in the past? I don't know, but it's a much smaller number, and it is just brutal economics for the big media companies.
We have studied this, folks, and this is just one big Bloomberg surveillance experiment, I should say. I can't say the early indications of our international reach on YouTube are just jaw-dropping. Good morning, Bangkok, in the good evening of the Pacific Rim. Next, Lisa.
Love that. The peak of Atlantic hurricane season starting to get underway, right? But this new bank rate survey, it shows that a lot more homeowners, they aren't really financially prepared for these extreme weather things. 1 in 4 say they're unprepared for it, like a hurricane, tornado, wildfire, flooding. The Wall Street Journal has an article about this not too long ago showing the increase in how much more people are paying for this. But 15% say they won't be able to even pay the deductible without going into debt if something were to happen. So it's kind of like an open your eyes thing, mainly in the South and the West.
Tom, I was
usually for that.
riding the Vespa around the Jersey Shore yesterday, and I came across this measurement where they show where the high water mark was for Superstorm Sandy. It was twice my height. So it was like 12, 13 feet. And I looked around, and there were houses everywhere. They must have been just all destroyed, and they're all, of course, new construction.
I lived directly.
I don't know what folks there do.
My father was in a fire zone in California, and there's some serious fires out on the West Coast in that terrible heat right now, and they could only insure half the house. I mean, and they just...
So you can just insure half your...
No, they were told. They didn't have a choice.
That happened to our house out in California. Really? We finally lost insurance, so we had to go to Lloyd's of London to get insurance. Those are the people that secure, like, ships going through the Suez Canal. That's the last line of insurance for people in California. That's how grim it is.
You had to cut the kids off from their cell phone bills. The premium
absolutely.
Was so high.
I'm still paying everybody.
Next.
Okay, South Korea might have the lowest birth rate, right? But it's people, they still want to create a family. So they're trading in baby strollers for pet strollers, okay? So sales of dog strollers last year outpaced those of baby strollers for the first time. That's according to one of South Korea's largest online retailers.
Why are they not having children?
It's even strong in the first 6 months of the year. They just feel like they're not having any more children. They just say it's too expensive or whatever their reasoning is for it. Wow. But they're doing the dog strollers. I don't like the dog strollers. No. Please tell me you don't ride kennel fee
through Central Park.
The vet had a tantrum and won't get in it. Okay. Kennel fee all over it.
Really?
She's sitting there looking out like she owns the territory. It's okay. It's not Hermes, but it's a dog stroller.
I just can't. The other day, I saw a woman. She had the dog stroller, but then her little toddler was walking along next to her. I was like, something's not right here.
Yeah. You just wonder, like at the debate tomorrow night. I get it. Henrietta Treyz says they're going to do the border, and they're going to do abortion. Can somebody just talk about child care in America?
Yep.
That's the reason.
Would that be like, can we get 15 seconds?
Yep.
Like, what's the plan?
Yeah.
Yep.
And I know a lot of our listeners will say there is no plan. That's the way we want it. And it's a huge issue.
Post-pandemic, when people were home taking care of their kids, now they have to go back to work, and it just resurfaces this whole challenge once again. And Matt Miller raises it because he just came back, a year or two ago from Berlin, and they had great child care.
He's got like 4 kids, though, right?
He's working on it. He's a little late starter, but he's okay.
He's catching up.
Better late than never.
Lisa Mateo on the newspapers. Thank you so much. Thank you, Interactive Brokers. We need some debate music. I mean, we'll play Pat Benatar, Hit Me With Your Best Shot. Both campaigns this morning. What are they doing? They're saying help.
I never needed anybody's help in any way. Now
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in a fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr on assignment in San Francisco. Lisa Mateo with us as well. John Tucker filling in for Michael Barr. Apple Day, we've hardly talked about it. It's like a big deal.
Yep.
They trot out. It's going to be the usual guys with black turtlenecks.
Yeah.
Tell what are you looking for from Ed Ludlow in our team coverage of Apple?
Exactly. I mean, it's the phones. They got some wearables. So the question is for this iPhone, how much
watch?
How much? Yeah. I mean, how much AI is going to be involved in this phone, and will I even know it? Or will I use it? I have no idea, but I'm buying it.
I don't know when I do it, but you go to Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T.
Yep.
Somebody had, I'm sorry, I can't cite it, folks. I'll say Barron's, but I'm not sure. Somebody, 3/4 of phones are bought off of packages or whatever from the cell phone companies.
That's what I'm doing. I'm going to walk into the Verizon store and say,
get one for free.
Futures up 35. Damien, wait, Damien. Futures up 40. We're up 35 right now. See, Damien's rattling me. We're up 35. Right now, there's green in the screen, just like the Jets. The VIX 21.14. From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa
Good morning.
Mateo.
Yes, futures. We are on the mend, and this is after showing September living up to its reputation as a tough month for stocks. We had the S&P 500 fell 4.2% last week on concerns about the health of the U.S. economy. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said there are, quote, no red lights flashing for the financial system as the U.S. economy makes that soft landing. Futures. NASDAQ futures up 0.7%. Dow, S&P futures up 0.6%. The 2-year yield at 3.69%. That's up 5 basis points. A yield on the 10-year 3.75%, and that's up 4 basis points. We have shares of Apple. They're up right now about 0.1% ahead of the event today that you were talking about, the iPhone 16 AI platform, AirPods, new Apple Watch. That comes out 1 p.m. Wall Street time. Tomorrow is also actually a big day for Apple. It's when the European Commission is set to announce a decision on whether it has to pay $14 billion in taxes. It's from a long-standing agreement with Ireland. We have shares of Boeing. They're up more than 4%. The company reached an agreement with its largest union, so big news there. But meanwhile, Air Canada, they're finalizing plans to suspend most of their operations because it's getting ready for possible pilot strike. For more on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning brought to you by Cohn Resnick. Advisory Assurance Tax is your business. Future ready. Talk to Cohn Resnick's digital advisory team about strategies and platforms to drive competitive advantage. On EM, Japan, on China, Damien Sassower with us right now. Is the dollar finally broken? Is it a weaker dollar trend?
Oh, you use the word broken. I love that word. It's not a broken beta regime. It's certainly a beta regime that has shifted. It's one that's shifted in favor of growth over inflation. We know where we are now. U.S. rest of world rate compression has negative implications for the dollar, and I don't think we're there quite yet. So, there is certainly runway for the dollar to weaken from current levels. And, if you're an investor, I mean, the carry trade is not something you want to be looking at right now. You probably want to be looking to growth or value as a driver of FX crosses, and that means you're going to be looking sort of at intra-regional crosses like Real Mex or Thai baht Indonesian rupiah. You're going to stay away from the dollar. You're going to stay away from the Japanese yen because you just can't get a read on it.
Well, I mean, the yen, don't I have the government supporting the yen here?
Well, you got hikes coming, right? You're going to have another hike coming in October, maybe even another one in December. I think the market's probably underestimating the extent to which the BOJ is going to be hiking rates here in the face of, wage inflation in Japan, something we've not seen in, 30 years. But, you mentioned China before I came on, and we have to talk about it because even monetary expansion can be deflationary if it's aimed at the supply side of the economy as opposed to demand side of the economy, and that is exactly what we're seeing in China. You are not seeing them address the real issues there. That economy is weakening, and now you've got Yi Gang, the former PBOC governor, on the tape.
Did you see those comments?
Yeah, I mean, that is very, very unusual for any former official of the central bank to be going out there and kind of, counterintuitive to what the government is currently doing.
I'm in Beijing. I go to a lunch. And of course, it's a lunch with a
Dim sum?
rotating thing in the middle.
Sure.
And there's things moving on it.
Oh, I love that.
Yi
Conveyor
Gang
belt.
walks in before he was head of the central bank. Sits right next to me. It was wonderful. It was very, very
What did
cool.
he
It was
eat? The soup dumplings?
I can't remember. I didn't eat anything that was moving. That's what I remember. But his comments, Paul, I'm sorry. You have a legitimate aggregate deflationary impulse in China.
So what are your clients, Damien, saying about China these days?
So, look, it's still a funding currency, but because it's such a managed currency, you really can't rely on it to fund, leverage positions elsewhere. I think really at the end of the day, it's really the U.S. where you can, kind of make a little bit of a cleaner assessment of where we are and what you're seeing here and the steepening of the U.S. Treasury curve. I mean, it's everyone's saying, get long duration in the U.S., get long MBS. No, it's the steepening. And what happens when you see a curve steepen, or specifically like we're seeing here in the U.S., is it starts longer, 5-year 30, it moves to 2s 10s, which is where we are now. We're now in positive territory. And it moves to 2s 5s, and it moves down into these micro steepeners. And I think that's where you're going to see a lot more of the price action here. You're going to see sort of that steepening in the front end of the U.S. Treasury curve. And I don't think we're even close to where we can be there yet.
What happens? What is oil? WTI crude oil below $69 a barrel. What does that mean for the Brazils of the world, the Venezuelas of the world? How does that affect your market?
Such a great question. I would say 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was on I was on the show and I was talking about how we're looking for commodity price weakness to confirm the global growth slowdown, and lo and behold, now we've seen it. Right? I mean, crude oil has fallen out of bed, down 10%. I think over the last week. I mean, you've got copper now down something on the order of 5% month to date. I mean, iron ore is down 17% year to date. It's getting clobbered. And so, if that you take it all together, it just means that, there is a growth slowdown. It is coming, and the world is feeling it.
Is there still a feeling in your market, in the emerging markets, that the U.S. economy is still exceptionally strong relative to the rest of the world?
I think it's something you have to be mindful of. I mean, I don't think, it's the best of the worst, right? But I don't think, it makes sense to basically be playing for that U.S. exceptionalism theme. I mean, if you just look at U.S. equities, right? I mean, look at what has happened in real estate, in financials, and utilities. Utilities is now the sector in the S&P that is leading. I mean, it was IT was up just last month? It was up 30%, year to date. Now it's only up 16%. I mean, I think utilities are up 19% year to date. So this is a rate-sensitive move.
Right.
People are allocating to rate-sensitive sectors, and it makes sense.
I was at Michael's,
Wow.
I know that
having
place.
lunch at Michael's. They got the New York Jets helmet in the window. I mean, Michael's is all new. It can't be the Giants after what we saw this weekend.
It's terrible.
I don't understand the betting other than there's a 3.5 point spread.
Yep.
Are the Jets that good?
Well, I mean, they're that bad, right? I mean, they are an underdog by 3.5, 4 points. But no, I mean, it's not that they're bad. It just means the Niners they made it to the Super Bowl. They are a team to beat here, and they've got CMC. They've got their quarterback back. They got their wide receiver back. Their offensive tackle. They're healthy. The Jets are, they are to be determined, I guess, whether or not Aaron Rodgers can stay healthy and whether or not these two, young players, Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall, can really deliver on Monday night. Let's go.
He's 40 years old.
Yeah, please.
What is 40 years old Damien in the NFL? What is that?
He's only 10 years younger than me, Tom.
In hockey, there was Chris Chelios, and that's it.
No, I mean, look, he looks great. I mean, he does. I mean, and he's in great shape for a 40-year-old. I mean, and his golf game is pretty there, too. So, look, I'm optimistic. Ever the optimist as any Jet fan is going into the opening day. But, we will see if he can survive at least a series or two this year. I mean, my goodness.
How was your rotisserie thing this weekend?
It was not good. I mean, if there was one downside to this weekend, my fantasy teams did not show up. I don't know what happened. I had Saquon Barkley in two out of my three leagues, and it still wasn't enough. I mean, that just shows how bad I drafted. But that doesn't mean the season's over. I have Mahomes in one of my leagues.
Okay.
I have Josh Allen in another league.
Right,
Josh
so
Allen had a pretty good. I'll be okay. But it's those receivers, those flex positions. I mean, for you fantasy guys out there.
Are you like putting kids through school on what you're doing in rotisserie?
I wouldn't say I'm putting them through school, but it's life lessons, Tom. And my son is an avid fantasy baller, and I think he has a pretty good team this year as well. So yeah.
Okay, well, Damien Sassar,
well,
thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It's so strange to have him here as a guest.
I know. Usually he's working, right?
Yeah.
On Fridays, it seems, in the summer. There's a theme there.
There's a theme.
Give me 30 seconds here. I mean, John Cena's out. Good morning, John Cena. What he did to Batista 14 years ago was unbelievable. John Cena's pumped up Mets. The Mets are like getting it done.
Getting it done.
When have I said that?
Look, I guess the Mets for me, they're like the Yankees' little brothers because I am a Yankees fan. And, you know, I am very fond of the way they're playing. They're only half a game out now. Maybe they are the wild card now. I mean, it was them in Atlanta fighting for that last slot. But I mean, I'm a Yankee fan, and this is all about the Yankees this year. We got to see what they can do.
Yeah, please, Damien, go away. Damien Sassar talking about the dreaded New York Yankees. Of course, seriously driving huge must-read coverage on EM from Bloomberg Intelligence. I mean, Lisa, it's just that simple there. I mean, between The Rock and John Cena, I mean,
don't get me started now.
These guys are large.
If you had to choose, though, where would you go?
That's a tough one.
Yeah,
I
that's a
still
tough
got to
one.
stick with
Do you
The
know
Rock,
John
though.
Cena's the pride of Cushing Academy?
Is that right?
Up in New England.
I didn't know that. Okay.
He furthered his education up there before pro wrestling. Good morning, Mr. Cena. Thank you for your support. Futures up 33. With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
All right, Tom, Paul, and Lisa, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris heading into tomorrow night's debate with the latest New York Times Siena College poll showing Trump ahead by just 1 percentage point among registered voters. But Harris is getting a prominent vote from across the aisle. Former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney.
She understands that this election is going to require a coalition of people from across the political spectrum supporting her. And that also necessitates an understanding that you've got to govern for all of those people.
Liz Cheney appearing on ABC's This Week, heard here on Bloomberg Radio. Our coverage of the ABC News presidential debate, that begins tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Wall Street time. A special edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg Television. The Appalachia High School community got together last night in Winter, Georgia to hold a memorial for the victims of last week's mass shooting at the school that killed 2 students and 2 teachers and left 9 others wounded. Brian Jones's daughter is a senior at the school. He says he supports prosecutors' decision to charge the suspect's father in the mass shooting.
As a father who has guns, if any of my kids were investigated for making threats like that to a school system, I'm sorry. You shouldn't be buying your kid any kind of weapon.
14-year-old Colt Gray accused of carrying out the deadliest school shooting in more than a year. The White House is taking steps to lower mental health care costs, seeking to ensure that Americans have the same access to mental health and substance abuse benefits that they have to physical health benefits. Under guidelines being announced today, a new rule will require hundreds of health plans to make changes when they're providing inadequate access to mental health and substance use care. As Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer emphasizing the importance of avoiding a government shutdown September 30th as lawmakers return to Washington after the August break. In a letter to his Democratic colleagues Sunday, Schumer said his party favors a short-term funding extension, a continuing resolution, and called on Republicans to support a bipartisan effort. Global news, 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg.
John Tucker, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. Did you miss the NFL package this weekend, the 3 networks that wanted to be together but they weren't?
I didn't see that.
I don't
know.
It's
there's
been
a couple
blocked.
of games I want to watch. But the people, the diehard NFL fans, if they want to overdose on NFL, they can do it now with the
And
the
streaming's
Red Zone
here to stay.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like there'll be a game and it's on Peacock and it's nowhere else, right?
Right, and that's right. If you want it, you got to subscribe. So that's where we are. So
Do you think the YouTube highlights are a big deal? I actually went and looked
I think
at
anything on YouTube is a big deal because just given the viewership there and the audience, just extraordinary.
Good morning on YouTube. Good morning on Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. Thrilled with the international pickup that we've seen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks, well, staging a partial recovery. This is after a sell-off triggered by cooling U.S. jobs data really left traders wondering how aggressively the Federal Reserve is going to cut interest rates. This week, we have more data on tap. We have a focus on the cost of living with the Consumer Price Index on Wednesday. We'll also get a report on producer prices Thursday, import prices Friday. Comes ahead of the Fed's meeting on interest rates next week. Right now, NASDAQ futures up 0.6%. Same for Dow futures, S&P futures up about 0.5%. We have the 2-year yield at 3.69%. That's up 4 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 3.74%, and that's up 3 basis points. To commodities, spot gold higher, $2,498 an ounce. Brent crude, $71 a barrel. WTI crude, $68 a barrel. Few companies making news. Alphabet's Google heading back to court today. They're going to face U.S. Justice Department antitrust allegations about its ad empire. Alphabet up about 0.5%. And then sticking with tech, Wall Street Journal says Elon Musk's XAI talking about a deal it would get some of Tesla revenue in exchange for providing the car maker access to its technology and resources. We have Tesla shares up about 2%. And Couche-Tard told 7&I that it wants to work together to agree on a, quote, friendly takeover. Couche-Tard up nearly 2% in Canada. We have 7&I up 2% in Japan. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
And Lisa, thanks so much. Haven't done this in a while, and it's not embarrassing. It just shows you the shocking time we've had with the focus on Mag 7. Dan Ives to be with us here in about 15 minutes. And so right now, Vishal Khandeja joins us, head of Broad Markets Fixed Income, Morgan Stanley. And you got a beautiful paragraph at the end, which is basically, should I be in stocks or should I be in bonds? How quaint. I mean, nobody's asking that question like we used to ask at 24/7. Should I be in bonds right now versus stocks?
You know, absolutely bonds. I know I'm speaking from a little bit biased vantage point, But I think the question, Tom, was quite a bit focused on cash versus bonds, that we fought that sort of battle. And I would say if you look back 2 years or even 2.5 years at this point, given the rally that we've seen in the last 6 to 8 weeks here in the U.S. and the duration, that bonds have comfortably defeated money markets or the front end. It was a great rate coming out of 2022 when the Fed was fighting. Nothing worked except for money markets, and then bonds took over. And then apart from that total return on income, I think what bonds did was the second mandate they delivered on, which was negative correlation to stocks throughout that year, throughout that period, if you will. So we do still think that given where the economy is headed, given what Fed is guiding us towards in 2025 and 2026, bonds are very compelling at this point, both from an income and negative correlation to stocks perspective.
All right, so I'm looking at the 2-year, 10-year Treasury. I got positive. I mean, the 10 years yielding 3.75, the 2 years 3.69. It's been inverted for a long time. I'm an equity guy. I could care less about you guys, fixed income people. What does that tell me, though?
You know, I think what tells you a little bit about where in the cycle we are and where in the Fed cycle we are.
Okay.
Quite a bit, that the front end is anchored because disinflation is very clearly and distinctly visible in the data and the economy. And now the second mandate that they're delivering on, which is the labor side, which is rebalancing. We've not seen layoffs yet. So the JOLTS numbers, et cetera, are showing that for very clearly in the last, at least the 3 JOLTS numbers that we've seen.
What does the spread market say? I'm guilty of this, Paul. I don't spend enough time on this. The difference, folks, of the yields away from full faith and credit as compared to full faith and credit. What does spreads say right now?
I think spreads are clearly pricing in certain parts of the spread market are definitely Pollyannishly pricing in a soft landing. But they are very clearly telling us that balance sheets are still strong here in the US, whether it's consumer or corporate balance sheets. Over the last 3 years after the stimulus and then the low interest rates, All of us on the mortgage side refinanced 3% 30-year fixed, almost running like hedge funds without market funding in our houses for 30 years. And similarly for corporations as well, refinancing their debt to 30 years and reducing their debt service, if you will. So the balance sheets are strong, and that's where the spread market gives you that indication. But in certain parts, definitely we think that it's Pollyannishly pricing in what the outcome would be of the economy next year.
Last week in investment grade new issue market, it just exploded. I mean, in new issuance. Did you guys at Morgan Stanley Investment, did you pick up the phone? What was your response? What was your level of reception to this just wave of new issuance in the investment grade market?
Yep, lukewarm.
Lukewarm.
I think
really? So
that
I can't if I'm picking up the phone from Goldman Sachs, calling you guys, I'm not slamming that deal. I'm not getting you guys to take down a big chunk of my deal.
Not in our active funds. I think active portfolios. I think we are going at a point. We came into this slightly underweight investment grade corporates on a spread duration basis, and we did, expect the supply thanks to all our counterparts. We were very well telegraphed here in the U.S. as well as in Europe. So our response was very lukewarm at this point at these spread levels.
Yeah. So if I take a shaky credit, I mean, Paul, we got to be careful here. A shaky credit, like Apple Computer of Cupertino, California, and first of all, I'm depressed. 30 years is 2054. Oof. That alone is depression. Yeah. This is the 4 7/8. I got to go 8s because I'm a fossil. 4 7/8 of 2053. From the bottom in October of 2023, it's gone up 18% from 87 to a 103, plus you're capturing a 4% plus coupon. And yet 99.9% of the world thinks you can't make money in bonds. Mm-hmm. Where's the opportunity right now, or is everything priced to perfection?
Thank you for saying that, Michael. Exactly our point. I think the opportunity is in the 0 to 10 year part of the entire fixed income market here in the U.S. For us. Yes, we are allocated idiosyncratically to certain high yielding currencies and emerging market as well, but I think we are very high in dollarized portfolios right now, so very low outside of dollars. Securitized credit still seems very attractive to us. Agency MBS, I know 10 other commentators came in and said the same thing, but we've covered a lot of our underweights. We are probably overweight in agency MBS. And the way I go back to that first point that I made, the 0 to 10 year part giving us the best risk-adjusted return from an income as well as from a negative correlation to stocks or your risky part of that 30-year. The moment you venture out of that 10 to 30-year part of the Treasury curve or even the US IG curve, if you will, on the investment grade corporate side, that's where the negative correlation argument breaks down and you start having pretty depressing discussions about deficits and what that will do to the back end of the Treasury curve.
What's your Federal Reserve going to do on September 18th?
They're cutting 25 basis points, and then they cut another 3 times. That's probably till the beginning of 2025, and that's where I think they then, in our opinion, I think base case do a little bit of this start and stop and see what the economy is telling them, because these are recalibration cuts.
20 seconds. One final question. You're going to buy a new iPhone for your family? You need to buy 4 new iPhones?
My daughter is on me. We have to buy one.
Have to buy a new one?
Absolutely.
Is there a Y here, or is it just we have to have the pink one?
It's have to. It's definitely the black one. She's moved on from the
black
pink one.
Okay, we've gone from Barbie on to art chick or whatever.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. That's graduation has happened.
This has happened. See, this is the real world. Forget about
Apple gets you. And then once you're in that ecosystem, it's just you can't get out. You got the watch, like Lisa Mateo's got the watch. You got the AirBuds.
We thank Vishal Kendruja, Apple analyst from Morgan Stanley. Don't be a stranger. Come back, Vishal, please. Thank you so much for joining today. What I love is there's an article, and this everybody knows this drives me nuts. It's some guy saying the chip doesn't matter.
Right.
And I'm like, it's an A18. They're up to A18. I don't know where they make them. I don't know what they do with them. All I know is all of my engineering years ago is nothing matters but the chip. And I assume they're going to say something today like the chip is a big deal.
The chip is a big deal. And that brings you to the NVIDIAs of the world and the AI and who's doing what, and Intel and what Intel's not doing in terms of the AI chips. So, so it's a tough one. NVIDIA looking a little positive here today.
Futures up 40 right now. Futures up 29. Good morning, Washington, New York. Good morning, Boston. 92.9 FM on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got green on the screen after a really rough week for losses. We have the NASDAQ up 0.5%. Same for Dow futures. S&P futures, they're up about 0.5% as well. We get to the bond market. The 2-year yield, 3.68%. That's up 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 3.74%. And that's up 3 basis points. To currencies, the dollar stronger. Japanese yen down about 0.6%. 143.30 against the dollar. The euro weaker. British pound weaker. We have Bitcoin up about 1% at 55,000. Moving the markets, Summit Therapeutics up 32%. The latest data had a lung cancer drug. It showed it beat Merck's Keytruda in a progression-free trial. Merck right now down more than 2%. And shares of Palantir Technologies, Dell Technologies, Erie Indemnity, they are higher before the bell. It was announced the stocks would be added to the S&P 500 before the start of trading on September 23rd. And finally, Trump Media and Technology up nearly 4%. It was up as much as 14% this morning. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo, and that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much, Lisa Mateo. Friday, what a great job by our team in giving you economic analysis off of the jobs report. Our economic indicators always brought to you by Commonwealth. Join over 2,000 independent financial advisors. They are taking control of their growth with advisor-centric support, future-ready technologies, grow on your own terms with a partner dedicated to your success. Go to commonwealth.com to learn how. Surveillance correction. I thought Dan Ives was in Seoul to see Lincoln Park there later in the month, but he's really there to see EAJ, who was with Day 6. K-pop, Dan's a huge K-pop fan.
Didn't know that. Good to
so
know.
We're thrilled he could join us from Seoul before he sees EAJ. Jay is so good. Again, I just can't say enough about his song Car Crash. Speaking of Car Crash, Dan Ives, an important day for Apple. You know where I'm going to go. It drives me nuts, all the Apple fanboys ignoring the chip. The new A18 chip is a leap forward. Is that correct?
It's a huge leap forward, and as we've talked about, this is one of the hearts and lungs of their success. I mean, the A18 chip, that will be the enabler, how 20% of the world ultimately interacts with AI through an Apple device.
So talk to us about this latest phone coming out, the 16 phone here. As it relates to AI, what is the company touting in terms of AI capabilities?
Look, Apple Intelligence. I mean, Paul, I view it. This is the consumer AI revolution, and this is really the start. It's a historic day because Apple Intelligence, even though it's going to be released in sort of bits as we go into the next few months, this is the building blocks for how hundreds of apps will get built within the Apple ecosystem. That'll be generative AI, and from an open AI perspective. When you look at a personal assistant, this was always the vision. And I think some of what they're going to show at the event will be, I think, eye-opening to where Apple's going with AI.
So how important is this version of the 16? I wouldn't call it revolutionary. Is it just kind of what we've seen over the last several years, evolutionary?
Well, I think it's less about the hardware. And I mean, outside the chip, it's what it's enabling with Apple Intelligence, because this is really the start of what's going to be the software-based AI era at Apple. And I think that's and then when you look at how this is all playing out, you have 300 million of 1.5 billion iPhones that have not upgraded in 4+ years. That is the reason this will be, I continue to believe, this will be a cycle that will ultimately exceed its historical 231 million units.
Over the weekend, Dan Ives, I saw that 3/4 of iPhones are purchased through the fancy plans, the Mateo household, the Sweeney household. I mean, you last did that, what, 2000,
I don't know,
19 or
they find my credit card every week.
My household on a weekly basis. Do you have any knowledge, Dan Ives, of what Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile will do?
I think massive discounts. And I think because they recognize that this is the opportunity, given where that install base is, this upgrade cycle's been an elongated one. And this will, what I believe from an Apple perspective, it will mark the start of really Apple's next growth frontier. And I think when we look at to the next year, China had its last negative quarter. It now grows. And the reason I'm in Asia, because all of our unit checks is showing upticks. This started at 80 to 84 million. We're now above 90 million in terms of units coming out for iPhone 16.
So, Dan, talk to us about China here. What's the latest thinking there for Apple? How are they competitively positioned there? And talk to us about, you mentioned becoming a growth story again. What's your expectation for China over the next several quarters?
Yeah, and look, Huawei launched their phone. They'll have an event also tonight. But I think that's actually less of a headwind now, because you have 100 million iPhones roughly in China that are in a window of an upgrade, haven't upgraded in 3+ years. And I think all the indications are we start to now see growth in that key region, which has been a headwind. And I think you now, when you look at the growth of Apple, so much of it relies on China. And now that starts to become a tailwind for Apple, I think, going into this next year.
Okay, I got 40 buys. And folks, this is interesting. I got 18 holds on Apple. We've talked to some of these people, and they take a different tack than Mr. Ives at 285. We're waiting for an upgrade. Do you want to give us a price upgrade here this morning, Dan Ives, so I can make some news and go home early?
Look, I think this event, I mean, as we've talked about on the show, this event, I think, it will be a historical event, not just for Apple, but I think this is how most consumers are going to interact with AI.
Ed Ludlow goes out. He has his black shoes with the white soles. He's going to drive his stupid Tesla to Cupertino with no hands on the steering wheel. What's going to be at this event, Dan Ives, for you to say that? Why is this going to be a big deal?
Because they're going to show on the demos what's coming and how most consumers are now going to start to interact with AI in its true sense. The generative AI piece off of the A18 chip, I believe this is really going to be the game changer on the consumer side for AI. And it all starts with Apple and their 2.2 billion iOS devices. That's why this is going to be so important.
Right.
And then we saw at WWDC in June, this will be I think a moment for Cook.
So you're going to use AI, Paul, on your new fancy phone
Darn right I am.
to pre-order from the package store before you take the Vespa down there?
Exactly. That's the
That's
whole
what
thing.
we're using
That's the
AI
whole
for.
thing. Yep.
Lisa, what are you going to use AI for?
I don't know.
Pre-ordering at Costco.
Tell
Yes.
me with my Costco
Dan Ives,
order.
what is Lisa Mateo going to use AI for?
I could see Lisa Mateo using AI for maybe some generative AI around softball. I mean,
Yes.
that I could see that.
Yes,
I
got
can
to
see
do
that.
it. That's my daughter.
Dan Ives, safe travel.
Yeah,
safe
safe
travel. We really, really appreciate it. He's a trooper. It's the late evening there. And so we thank all of our Pacific Rim listeners from Tokyo on down and around Singapore over to India. We are thunderstruck by the international reach of YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts to hear Dan Ives from Seoul, Korea. He is with Wedbush. Futures up 33. With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
All right, Tom, Paul, and Lisa. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump getting ready for their first and, for now, only debate tomorrow night in Philadelphia. Meantime, the latest New York Times Siena College poll has Trump in the lead over Harris among registered voters by just 1 percentage point, 48% to 47%. Our coverage of the ABC News presidential debate that begins tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Wall Street time, on a special edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio and television. Republican lawmakers accusing the Biden administration of lying to Americans and sacrificing the safety of U.S. soldiers during the 2021 Afghanistan withdrawal. Bloomberg's Steve Potus has more from Washington.
It's a report that seeks to implicate Vice President Kamala Harris before the election. It says President Joe Biden's team misled and in some instances directly lied to the American people at every stage of the Afghanistan withdrawal. It claims the administration's failures led directly to the killing of 13 American troops. The report was released 2 days before Harris is set to debate former President Trump. Representative Gregory Meeks, the top Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, says it omits key findings from witness interviews. He calls it a partisan attempt to tarnish Vice President Harris. In Washington, Steve Potusk, Bloomberg Radio.
How to curb and counter China's influence and power. That'll dominate the U.S. House's first week back from summer break, with lawmakers taking up a series of measures that target Beijing. A jury selection is scheduled to begin today in the federal trial of 3 former Memphis police officers charged with violating the civil rights of Tyree Nichols. He's the 29-year-old man whose fatal beating last year was caught on police camera while also triggering protests and calls for police reform. The defendants have pleaded not guilty to charges that they deprived Nichols of his rights through excessive force and failure to intervene. And a storm system in the Gulf of Mexico forecast to strengthen into a hurricane early this week. It'll bring heavy rain, damaging winds, potentially life-threatening storm surges to parts of Texas and the Louisiana coastlines. If it continues to strengthen, it'll be named Tropical Storm Francine. And millions of Americans falling behind on student loan payments a year after the pandemic freeze ended. And soon that's going to start hurting their credit scores. In a report released last month, the Government Accountability Office estimated that about 10 million borrowers, more than a quarter of the total, were behind on payments as of the end of January. Global news, 24 hours a day, and whatever you wanted with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, and
John
Lisa.
Tucker, thanks so much. News pending. Big Lots.
Yep.
Which is, and it's for those of you worldwide, even across the country, it's an institution. I mean, there it is. It's a certain way of shopping. It was, maybe a model from 30, 40, 50 years ago. And it just, I'm looking at the financial screen, and it's painful.
It is.
Free cash flow. The cash burn is substantial.
Yep, Columbus, Ohio-based company, Tom. 10,000 employees here, so this is a lot of folks are going to be impacted by this with this bankruptcy filing. I'm not sure what Nexus Capital Management is, what they really bring to the table. Hopefully, at the bare minimum, some capital to support the capital structure here.
I've done my part to support them.
Have you?
An outdoor couch. Beautiful.
Nice.
Yeah, it was just a nice piece of furniture.
An outdoor couch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Took like 9 guys to put in the back of the car.
Okay.
Some assembly required. Some assembly.
Some assembly. John Tucker, thank you for that. Futures up 35, NASDAQ up 0.7%. Bloomberg Surveillance were brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Thank you, Interactive Brokers, and their IB bond marketplace. Access their vast selection of over 1 million global fixed income securities. No markups, built-in spreads, none. Low transparent commissions. Learn more at ibkr.com/bonds. No markups, no built-in spreads, low transparent commissions. Thank you, Interactive Brokers, for your support of what we do in economics, finance, investments. Jobs Day, a lot of work over the weekend.
Yeah.
On the American labor economy.
Yeah.
Like temporary versus full-time employment.
Right.
And a very sensitive issue. I wonder if it comes up in the debate of immigration and migrants getting jobs in native-born Americans not. Some very sensitive work done by some qualified people.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the bullish call there on migration is the folks coming over, by and large, a lot of them are getting jobs. A lot of them are then taking their wages and buying stuff. So a lot of economists say it's been positive for not just the labor economy, but the broader economy overall, aside from the politics.
Part of our debate coverage, David Gura to join us here in moments. David leading our coverage, of course, with Balance of Power. Joe Matthew, Kaylee Lyons as well, 8 p.m. Tomorrow night. Some dollar strength and yen weakness, 143.18 on yen, out 0.6%. Futures up 34, Dow futures up 261. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures in the green. This as stocks try to recoup a little bit of the ground that they lost in recent sessions. Right now we have NASDAQ futures up 0.7%, Dow futures, S&P futures up 0.6%. The 2-year yield at 3.69%. That's up 4 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 3.74%, and that's up 2 basis points. To commodities, we have spot gold $2,503 an ounce. We have Brent crude $71 a barrel, WTI crude $68 a barrel. Nvidia kind of set to pare back some of its recent losses. Shares up nearly 1%, but analysts at Citi, they're saying not so fast. They're warning that the AI-fueled winning streak coming to an end. Few companies making news. Sources say HSBC considering combining its commercial and investment bank divisions. It's part of its CEO's push to eliminate overlapping roles, also to shed some expenses. We have ADRs up about 1%. And PayPal teamed up with Shopify to process some of the payment company's debit and credit card transactions, PayPal and Shopify up 1%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. Tomorrow night, Henrietta, Treyz, Paul Sweeney, and others have said possibly immigration will come up. She has a family that was 50 miles outside Warsaw, Poland. And as she stated in a speech in Warsaw years ago, too many did not make it out of the carnage of World War II. She did to Brooklyn. Her father was a physician, took patients on their first floor of where they lived in Bay Ridge. She did pretty good in economics.
For the U.S., the kinds of metrics that we would monitor that would summarize risks, whether it's asset valuations or the degree of leverage, things look good. There are not, I don't see red lights flashing. While there are risks, it really has been amazing to be able to get inflation down as meaningfully as we have. This is what most people would call a soft landing. Certainly may go back there. I, would welcome a visit by my Chinese counterpart.
Bottle it. That's all I can say. He went down to Texas. It was a little table with the chairman of the Federal Reserve. She still talks like she's chairman of the Fed, not Secretary of Treasury. And David Gura, it was just brilliant. What was different about this conversation versus a usual midweek media frenzy?
It lasted an hour, and that it's always great to get as much time as you can with a guest. But I think that she was able to kind of move away from what she's accustomed to talking. She's a very careful speaker. She wants to, not upset markets, be very cautious. But I think that we were able to get into a lot of the history that you're describing. She studied with James Tobin at Yale. Went from Brooklyn to New Haven to Cambridge, met her husband at the Fed, and has had this very distinguished career. We're able to get into all of that, and it wasn't an exit interview. She hasn't said she's leaving. I pushed her on that. I said, is there a world in which you stick around if Vice President Harris wins? But it did feel like it was a moment when she could look back on her achievements, not just in this job, but in all of these marquee jobs that she's had in other administrations in Washington, Tom.
How does she feel about this U.S. economy here? We had the jobs report on Friday. Is a soft landing, is a reasonable landing for the economy still what she's seeing?
She believes it, and so there were two parts to this trip. I mean, I went down a little early, and so did she. She visited this IRS processing center in Austin, and it was fun to see her try to use one of these new mail sorting machines and all of that. But that was right after the jobs numbers came out, and she said that the jobs market, to her eyes, is still healthy and strong, and I pushed her on that. But she said that she's looking at all of the economic data together. As Tom was saying, she a former Fed chair is still thinking about that dashboard and looking at all of this, and she still feels confident, but is of course aware of where the trend seems to be going. And as we're talking about, she's a trained labor economist. This is what animates her. This is what has driven her through her career in academia and in public sector as well.
I mean, there's any number of issues here, including her husband's a Nobel Prize winner, and I bust her chops about that all the time. But Paul Sweeney, she codified the word slack. I mean, she owns the word slack within economics and was heated on that during the great financial crisis.
A lot of our discussion that Tom and I had on Friday with this jobs number was, if you just look at the headline numbers of 4.2% on, the headline numbers look okay, and I guess that's what Yellen is looking at. However, we had some people say, hey, if you look at the recent trends, it is softening. So if you're the Fed, you got to get out ahead of the curve. Did she have any comment about maybe some of the recent trends, and is that causing her any concern?
Well, in terms of trends, she talked a lot about wages, and she points to that as sort of a bit of bright light. But I think what you're getting at in part is, would she have any advice or counsel for the current Fed chair with whom she worked? She wouldn't. I mean, that's where she's most studious, is not kind of dispensing advice or anything prescriptive toward the Fed. But to the point about the soft landing, she believes it's entirely possible. We're on track for that.
What's the debate look like? You're busy. I mean, you're in Texas, now you're going to Philadelphia.
I couldn't get the direct Austin to Philly flight.
But there is an Acela train from here, I understand.
Yes, and I will take that down.
Eric Balchunas, he tells us.
Regularly.
Yes.
What's going to be the Gura surprise at the debate?
Well, it's funny. I think back on that last debate between Trump and Biden, and we knew from the get-go this wasn't going the way that the Biden campaign planned. So it was the immediate visual. I think that something similar is going to be at play here in Philadelphia. These two people have not seen each other in the same room before. Of course, they haven't debated before. that moment when we see how they interact and what the atmosphere is going to be like in that room at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, I think is going to be hugely important. I mean, yes, Kamala Harris has debated before. We think of the zinger that she had with Mike Pence. I'm speaking when he interrupted her during the vice presidential debate. This is a big moment for both of these candidates, the only one that's on the calendar so far. And you look at the latest polling from the New York Times and Siena College, there are a lot of Americans who say, look, I'm familiar with Donald Trump. I know what animates him, how he operates. She is still a bit of an enigma. Voters want to know more about her. Yes, what her policies are, but also sort of what animates her and how she comports herself. And this will be perhaps the moment during this campaign when a lot of people will see that.
Do you think her camp is saying go toe-to-toe with former President Trump, or maybe just stick to policy and not get engaged in where he may want to go, in terms of rhetoric?
I read deeply over the weekend in terms of how she's preparing. She's been holed up in Pittsburgh at the Omni Hotel for 5 days, going through traditional debate prep. And I mentioned that moment with Mike Pence. That was seen as a great moment by supporters of Vice President Harris and her team as well. Look, we're going to have these muted mics again. It's going to be hard to get that kind of
muted
yes,
mics?
there will be muted mics
We
again.
tried that on surveillance.
Yes,
that went down in flames.
Tom has taped over the button. We're unable to do it. But yes, we will have it. That will limit her ability to kind of get some moment like that out of Donald Trump. But suffice to say, they're trying to find ways to get him animated and to sort of step out of the kind of prepared mode that he would have on stage.
On the Gura travels, I mean, he's down in Texas. So what do you do in Texas? You buy a Stetson, except they were made in Philadelphia originally.
Yes.
Did you really buy a Stetson?
I went to Allen's Boots on South Congress,
Yeah.
and this was impulsive. But then you get in there and you start talking to the folks who know all about. So I bought an open road Stetson. It was fitted. This is the LBJ style Stetson.
Oh, this is a large one.
Yeah. I'll bring it in. I didn't want to bring it because I didn't bring it to Philly. But
you're going to look like you got a deal with Warner Brothers down in Nashville.
Yes, I should. Maybe I
You
should
wear it
run this
everywhere.
today. I will say another highlight for me, if I can allow it, was Julia Coronado kindly came to the event itself, and we got some margaritas on 6th Street afterward, and so she sends her regards. Back to you,
Dr. Coronado, of course.
Has worked with.
What's she saying? 25 and 50 beeps.
I think that she's leading.
After the third margarita.
I don't want to speak for her, but I think that she sees the reasoning for a 50 beep. We'll see if Powell agrees.
This will be an interview. Again, I really can't say enough about it. David Gura's lengthy interview with the Secretary of Treasury 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now. That will be a really important view into Chairman Yellen's views on where we are in her public service. Whether you agree or disagree with her public service to the nation has been extraordinary. Are you going to do the big take today? Or?
Yes, and it'll be drawn from that. So I know that the full version is available on the Bloomberg Talks podcast. We'll do one that has a bit of my commentary as well around it. And then I will say that, Janet Yellen goes out to eat in all these places where she is. She went to Whataburger in Austin, so we kind of began there because she's a big In-N-Out devotee as well, and I asked her which one is better. That's how we kick off the interview. Very diplomatic answer. They both have good qualities.
It was embarrassing. She sent a car up to U Street in Ben's Chili Bowl.
Yeah.
In London, in Washington, 2 or 3 times a week. David Gura, David, you need to listen to Pat Benatar to get ready for the debate.
All right.
8 p.m. tomorrow night.
is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Michael Barr on assignment in San Francisco. Jets 49ers tonight. Yes, someone emailed in. He is being medicated off the Detroit Lions win last night. John Tucker in for Michael Barr today. Futures up 37. Paul, the character of it, a nice bounce to the market.
A nice bounce to the market here, Tom, across the board. S&P and Dow both up about 0.7%. A little bit better on the NASDAQ, up about 0.8% here as we start off. And the 30-year Treasury, the 10-year Treasury, 3.73%. How about that?
Our new distribution, I really want to explain it to you right now before we get into Gura and Timmer here. And it's real simple. It's extraordinary melding of traditional radio, I'll get to that, and digital. Good morning on Android Auto, on Apple CarPlay across this nation, and stunningly worldwide. And I'm amazed by the reach of Apple CarPlay worldwide as that builds out the Apple soiree. Is it 12 noon? I'm sorry, I don't know the time, Paul.
The timing of this, we'll have to check it out.
Okay, we'll have to check it out. Is anyone awake in the control room?
1 p.m. Wall Street time. Thank you, Lisa Mateo.
You know, the control room, Lisa, it's like the old building, on like Route 9 past Worcester before. They got a Carling Black label sign blinking on and off in the control room as well. Hope they're with us this morning. We're on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Can't say enough about it. Thank you for that. It's the best thing you can do for us to subscribe to YouTube. 99.1 FM Washington, good morning. Big debate. Tomorrow, our flagship Bloomberg 1130 in New York. Good morning across the tri-state area. And 92.9 FM in Boston. Good morning. With our Bloomberg Business Flash from the Interactive Broker Studios, Lisa Mateo.
Yeah, and we've got green on the screen. Stocks trying to gain back some of its recent losses. You had the S&P 500. It fell 4.2% last week. Concerns about the health of the economy. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said there's, quote, no red lights flashing for the financial system as the economy makes a soft landing. We have NASDAQ futures up 0.7%. Dow futures, same there. S&P futures up about 0.6%. The 2-year yield at 3.68%. That's up 4 basis points. A yield on the 10-year 3.73%, and that's up 2 basis points. To gold, we have spot gold $2,500 an ounce. We have Brent crude $71 a barrel. WTI crude $68 a barrel. And yes, it's glow time for Apple. That's the name of the event today. Shares low, little changed ahead of it. The new iPhone 16 that'll be unveiled. New artificial intelligence platform and new models for AirPods and Apple Watch. Also, on a separate note, tomorrow is when the European Commission set to announce a decision on whether Apple has to pay $14 billion in taxes. It's a long-standing agreement with Ireland. And finally, shares of Boeing up about 3%. The company reached an agreement with its largest union. That includes increasing wages by 25% over 4 years and a commitment to build its next plane in the Seattle area. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate that. Joining us now is truly a giant of technical analysis. Urian Timmer is iconic at Fidelity Investments in Boston. I can't say enough about his work. We protect the copyright of all of our guests. Get his work through at Fidelity. Urian, I got an audible right off the top, and I want to tell you the magic of a leafy campus up Wellesley Avenue off Route 16. You go past the Wellesley Country Club, and there is Babson. They shook the nation a couple days ago by being ranked number 2 in the country for education of undergraduates. Urian Timmer, you own Babson. What is the Babson Kool-Aid? What is the pixie dust?
For me, and good morning. I was born and raised on the small island of Aruba, and I wanted to go to college in the States. My brothers went in Holland, as is typical for Dutch families in Aruba. And my father did some business with people in the Boston area, and they all told him, send your kid to Babson. And we went and we looked. I bought a suit for the first time to interview. I saw a young man walking down the campus with a rolled up Wall Street Journal under his arm. And I'm like, that was the image that I wanted for myself. And so I went to Babson in 1981. It was already an international kind of oriented college at the time. 8% of the student body was international. Now, of course, it's much more. But it has always provided that intimacy of a small business school that is still world class at the same time. And as an international student, that really fit the mold for me.
Extraordinary accomplishment for your Babson. Paul, pick it up on what we're doing here.
All right, Urian, I guess the discussion of the day is how is this U.S. economy and how is the Fed viewing this U.S. economy after the labor data on Friday? And how do you think it's going to impact its decision on September 18th?
Well, I mean, clearly they're going to start an easing cycle. I mean, we all know that. The question is how quickly, jumbo cuts or regular cuts, and where we end up, right? The forward curve right now is sub 3%. To me, that seems a little ambitious. And of course, that's a snapshot in time. The forward curve is always moving. It was certainly at these kinds of levels at the beginning of the year that proved to be premature. But the way I think of it is, the narrative has switched from the inflation side of the mandate to the job side of the mandate. And that's why we're so focused on the payroll reports. When you look at the JOLTS report and you look at kind of the help wanted index, right, the job vacancy rate, it has fully reversed the excesses from the COVID days. And so we've gone from a 3 percentage point shortage of labor to now kind of even. And if the Fed can sort of make it stop there, then they will have achieved, the perfect landing, right? And the perfect landing means they don't need to be restrictive, but they don't need to be accommodative. Yeah. So that gives you a neutral rate of maybe 3.5%, 4%, but no lower. Right. But the question is, the pendulum is always moving, and will it stop here or will it keep going? In which case, we're going to be talking about a recession at some point.
One of the 2-3 things I lecture on in technical analysis, folks, is a unit. Urian Timmer owns unit analysis on a more responsible investment. Do you look at a day chart, or is your unit a week, or is your unit a month? You look out, Urian, in your report this weekend at a unit of a month and call SPX a thing of beauty. You say 72% of stocks look great on a unit weekly chart as well. Is that the place to go in our analysis, or do we need to stay daily, or dare I say even hourly charts?
It's a great question, and it really depends on whether you're an investor or a trader. Obviously, a trader will look at hourly and daily. We are long-term investors here at Fidelity, so we look at weekly, monthly, quarterly, even annual, of course, for the really long-term view. But what I do is I try to do a sanity check via the chart. So I look at daily and weekly charts, but you want all the time frames to confirm each other, right? So if the monthly chart, which more often than not will go up just because it's a monthly chart and the market tends to go up over time, you want that to be confirmed by the weekly and the daily. And as you indicated, the monthly chart, and that's for the S&P 500 equal weighted index, really is a thing of beauty. I mean, it's only recently broken out of a base, so same with the Russell 2000. Something like 80% of stocks are above their moving average, their 200-day moving average, which means the majority of stocks are in uptrends. And the weekly chart more or less confirms that monthly chart. And that's where I look at for these intermodal confirmations.
Urian, we got to go, but Paul's dying to ask, so I'll ask for him. Do we need to do a surveillance remote from Burning Man?
Sure, but if you're going to join our camp, you need to be able to cook, or be willing to cook at least. So because we are a food camp and we provide thousands of meals to the community. And I just got back, still have some dust in my lungs, but we'll survive.
It's not for me, Tom. Unless there's a Four Seasons punk down in the middle.
Lisa, have you been to Burning Man?
No.
And excuse me, you're eating over there. Don't let us get in the way of your nutritious breakfast. Urian Timmer, thank you so much, and congratulations to your Babson. Urian Timmer with Fidelity in Boston. We have special good morning to 92.9 FM. in Boston. Bernie, man, I don't know what to say.
I don't know. It's good that he's.
Somebody brief me. Lisa, come on. The Rock goes, right?
If he goes, I'm going.
Yeah,
but I don't have any kind of desire to do it.
No.
I don't know.
It's a desert.
Wasn't it a disaster this year? Everybody got stuck,
Was that last year, the rain?
That was last year, I think, the rain.
Was it
last year.
No,
this year,
where do you go to the bathroom and where do you?
It's like Woodstock, right?
In the desert.
I mean, I don't know. We got to get Doug Cass back on. He was
No
at
thanks.
Woodstock. I mean, that
I'll
would be
pass.
good. Futures up 36 with our news in New York City. John Tucker.
Donald Trump and Kamala Harris head into tomorrow night's debate with the New York Times Siena College poll showing Trump in a 1-point lead among registered voters. Pangea Policy founder Terry Haynes says the vice president needs to meet or exceed expectations on the ABC News stage.
If she does reasonably well on that stage, I think people come away with the idea that she's a plausible president, and that acts, I think, as a sort of magnet helping things in her direction by and large.
Pangea Policy founder Terry Haynes was a guest on Bloomberg Surveillance. Our coverage of the ABC News presidential debate that begins tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Wall Street time, on a special edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio and Television. Congress returning from its August recess with just 3 weeks to avert a government shutdown, but Republican Congressman French Hill says no need to worry.
I am confident that we won't have a government shutdown because we're just a few weeks away from a national election, and I don't think that benefits anybody running for re-election. So I think we will navigate the need for a continuing resolution to get fiscal 25 spending moved to beyond the election.
Republican French Hill was a guest on Surveillance as well. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer sent a letter to fellow Democrats warning Republicans not to let so-called poison pills put funding at risk. Republicans put out a temporary spending bill last week that included an amendment requiring proof of citizenship to vote. The Biden administration says it opposes that. Republican lawmakers accuse the Biden administration of lying to Americans and sacrificing the safety of U.S. soldiers during the 2021 Afghanistan withdrawal. The accusation comes in a report that seeks to implicate Vice President Harris before the election. It says President Biden's team misled and in some instances directly lied to the American people at every stage of the Afghanistan withdrawal. Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Lisa Paul. Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Beetlejuice.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry. Big numbers in huge numbers for post-Labor Day September.
Yeah, I mean, 145 million plus global. That seems pretty big to me. I mean, it's a refresh. So it's Michael Keaton and.
How old is Michael Keaton now? Does anybody know?
That's a great question.
I'm not sure, but the reviews for the movie
We'll
were
put an
incredible.
intern on that. Oh, wait, the intern's all the way back to school. We go to Surveillance. There's nothing to do on the weekend, Mom. Correspondent Lisa Mateo. Did the Mateo household witness Beetlejuice?
We did not, but the reviews were really, really good for it. Like all my friends have been talking about it. A few of them did go, and they enjoyed it. They said it was nice. I have no life because I'm on a softball field all weekend. But
You were?
okay.
Was it a successful weekend?
It was. She knocked it out of the park.
Did
That's
better
what-
than the
Literally.
Red Sox.
That's
Wait,
my,
that's not
there
saying
you
much.
go. Sign
They
her up.
lost to the White Sox yesterday.
Oh,
How do you
that's
lose to
bad.
the White Sox?
That's bad.
Yikes.
Yep.
It's painful. Futures up 37. The VIX 21.16. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks staging a partial recovery after that sell-off from cooling U.S. jobs data really left traders wondering how aggressively the Fed will cut interest rates next week. Now, the week has more data on tap this week. We have a focus on the cost of living, the consumer price index Wednesday. We'll also get a report on producer prices Thursday, import prices on Friday. Right now, NASDAQ futures up 0.7%. Same for Dow futures. S&P futures up 0.6%. The two-year yield at 3.68%. That's up 2 basis points. A yield on the 10-year 3.73%, and that's up 2 basis points. We have spot gold higher, $2,504 an ounce. We have Brent crude $71 a barrel. WTI crude $67 a barrel. Few companies making news. Alphabet's Google heads back to court today. They're going to face U.S. Justice Department antitrust allegations about its ad empire. Alphabet up about 0.5%. Also today, a trial of the FTC's attempt to block Tapestry's acquisition of rival Capri. Tapestry down about 2%. Capri ADR is down about 0.5%. And finally, Couche-Tard told 7 & I that it wants to work together to agree on a, quote, friendly takeover. We have Couche-Tard up nearly 2% in Canada, 7 & I up 2% in Japan. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. I was on LinkedIn years ago. And good morning, Dan Roth, editor-in-chief of LinkedIn, who's, it's like, okay. And I just drifted away. And of all people, Shonali Bassick is the one, Paul, that got me back on LinkedIn.
Is that right? Okay.
She said, you old fossil. We're sitting up at the food court. I'm having a bag of Cheez-Its. Shonali Bassick sits down, which is a state occasion, and she says, you're an old fossil. Get back on LinkedIn. She was right.
Okay.
The reason you want to be on LinkedIn, folks, is so you can read Terry Haynes. He writes these brilliant, short compendiums of his work, and even once in a while publishes the full Pangea policy. Terry Haynes joins us on the debate. Terry, what will you look at 8:01 tomorrow night?
Well, I'll look. I think I'll wait for 9 o'clock, won't I? I mean, isn't that when it starts?
Excuse me, my fault. Excuse me.
No.
It's like
I wish it was.
Why?
I mean, honestly, I'm with you. I wish it was 8.
Why did they start it at 9 o'clock? It's like Monday Night Football. Nuts. Continue, Mr. Haynes.
Well, you don't want the kids to be watching, I think, is the thing. It's like baseball. You don't want kids to be watching baseball either, right? But so, no, what I'm looking for, frankly, is whether Harris meets or exceeds the challenge of being viewed as a credible presidential candidate. That's really it. Everybody goes on about whether or not it's going to be about optics versus issues. It's always about optics, because the threshold issue here is whether Harris is a credible presidential candidate. Trump is a known quantity. Harris really isn't at this point, and so she needs to hurdle that. I think she probably does, based on performances over the last month plus. But it's a big moment for her.
Would you recommend that she engage former President Trump in some of the rhetoric that he likes to engage in during these types of events?
I would urge her, were I advising her, to not engage. I would actually to move past it and move on. I think the classic Harris riposte to a lot of this is, when she was asked in the CNN interview about why the Trump's criticism of her race, ethnicity, whatever, it was like, sort of ask and answer, old news, move on. And that feeds right into her page rhetoric here, and that's really what she wants to do.
Well, this came up this weekend. Somebody asked me, what after the debate, when we move on, Terry Haynes, what do we move on to the second, third week of September?
We go back to kind of the basic block and tackle of trying to get votes in swing states. Fundamentally, I don't think there's going to be unless there's an external exogenous shock of some kind, whether it be geopolitical or otherwise, I don't think you get a huge event. I think what you get is between Tuesday and the October 1st vice presidential debate, I think what you get is an awful lot of spade work in swing states to turn out votes and to convince the undecideds and get early vote. I mean, that's really where the rubber meets the road now.
So, Terry, I mean, most of the polls in that right now are saying a dead heat, and that's a little bit different. I mean, when Vice President Biden stepped down, Harris got this big bump and seemed to have maybe a 2 or 3 week honeymoon. That seems to have played out. So I guess we're just down to, again, every single vote counts.
Yeah, I think so, Paul. You know, from my perspective, the Biden swoon and the Harris resurgence is a little bit overblown. Biden entered the June debate 1 point down in a two-way national. A month later, the day he dropped out, he was 3 points down in the two-way national, and that's a testament to how hard-baked Democrat and partisan support really is. Harris reinflated that and moved back to even, but so far she hasn't been able to get even. But then there's, we're just getting past Labor Day here. So the debate is important in part because it's the first opportunity for her to reignite enthusiasm.
Terry, the Boston Globe this morning, Esme Jimenez writing, the underestimated, misunderstood, enormous voting power of Latino Americans. Over the weekend, I'm sorry I can't quote it, folks, but somebody said basically old fart Latinos are going Harris and young Latinos are going more Trump. Discuss that.
More Trump means more Trump than previously, which is almost none. And so, there's some interest from a variety of ethnic groups in greater interest in Trump than there has been. And it's also a mistake for Democrats, as they have, to take a lot of these voting blocks for granted. So there's going to be a huge effort to get them back. I would wager to you by the end of the day that the vast majority of those groups, the people in those groups, come home. They frankly will feel better about Harris as the president and frankly want to stay on that side.
Terry, is this going to be the only debate between these two candidates, or is there rationale for another?
You know what? I think it depends. There is a great rationale. It depends on the outcome of this one. I think there's a great rationale for another one on both sides. If one or the other side thinks they've got the opposition on the ropes, they're going to want to do something to try to put them away. Conversely, the other side's going to want to get back in the game. So I think there's certainly a possibility. Yeah.
Terry Haynes, thank you so much. I'm sure we'll talk to you often. I can't say enough about his work. Folks, look for his publications out on LinkedIn with Pangea. And, of course, his longer format with Pangea as well. Futures up 36. Dow futures up 297. Nice lift to the market, 0.8% in the NASDAQ 100. So I get a photo across the Twitter feed this weekend, and it was Joe Weisenthal and 111,169 other people attending a perfect autumnal day in Ann Arbor. I've never done that. Have you been in a crowd that big?
At Penn State, I have. They do about 107 and change.
Really?
Yes, and it's insane. There's nothing like it.
100,000 people in a stadium.
Yeah.
You went to the you went to
Rutgers,
the Rock. You went to Rutgers with the Rock that time. You went.
Yeah.
Huge.
So, but I mean, it's just Texas came in and beat Michigan at Michigan, and my takeaway was Texas is just really, really, really good. I mean, it's like holy cow, they're good, and they're ranked number 2. But you look at the top 10, it's all the SEC. So it's basically the SEC is completely running college football.
By that you mean Georgia, Florida,
I think they have 7 of the top 10 teams in the top 10, and there's, Ohio State's there, Penn State is there, maybe somebody else, but it's basically college football's now solidly the SEC and everybody else.
And after the first game, the second game, I mean, come on. How do you pronounce it? Duquesne, I think.
Duquesne,
thank you.
Thank you, yep.
Good morning, Pittsburgh.
Exactly.
Boston College 56, Duquesne 0.
Yep, that's a little
Does
rough.
the season start against number 6 Missouri next week?
Oh, boy.
For
They're good,
BC?
too. Yep, they're good,
That
too.
will be interesting. We'll have fun with that. Maybe if Michael Barr gets back, we'll be smarter. Michael Barr tonight, surveillance coverage, Jets, 49ers, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney with your opening bell report. Now, the market certainly reacted to the cooling U.S. jobs data last week. In fact, the S&P 500 fell 4.2% last week. Concerns about the health of the U.S. economy. This week, it's going to be interesting to see how the markets react to consumer prices on Wednesday. Let's get right to it and see how things kick off to start the new trading week. We start with the S&P 500 up about 0.6%, 37 points, 5,445. We have the Dow up 0.6%, 259 points at 40,601, and the Nasdaq up 0.8%, 150 points at 16,839. The two-year yield at 3.68%. That's up 3 basis points. A yield on the 10-year 3.73%, and that's up 1 basis point. To commodities, we have spot gold higher, $2,503 an ounce. We have Brent crude $71 a barrel, WTI crude $67 a barrel. At the open, yes, I want to check in with Apple shares before their big event at 1 p.m. Wall Street time. Well, they're down about 0.2%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Bloomberg Technology with world-class coverage of the Apple event. Really can't say enough what Ed Ludlow's doing out in San Francisco. You know, they showed a picture of him going across the Golden State Bridge with a Tesla with no hands on the wheel.
I know.
Would you do?
No way. You're going to end up in the. No way.
I don't get it.
There's water underneath that bridge.
It's like
that's
a public
point.
service of what he's doing.
Yep.
It's like seriously taking this task. This is our Global Wall Street interview of the day on fixed income. Out of Yale Economics, of course, DLJ years ago. Credit Suisse, I guess that was a mating that worked out.
Oh,
maybe.
gosh, we screwed that up.
He's with the Trust Company of the West, TCW. Paul, why don't you bring in Brian?
I mean, the good friends at DLJ, they were just minding their own business, not bothering anybody,
Exactly.
doing well, and then we come along
Exactly.
in Credit Suisse First Boston, buy them and screw it up.
You read the Maroon book. Brian Whalen
Yes.
and I waited before
Exactly.
we read the Maroon book. John, they had this young Turk, John writing, and
Yep.
you know, it was, you know, it was just, it's just what
Dennis
it was.
Leibowitz.
And, you know, Hokinson on economics and everything was
They were
fine
great.
at DLJ
Until we
until
came in.
you guys came along.
Brian Whaling, CIO Fixed Income for TCW Group. Hey, Brian, we got some labor data there that seemed to give everybody, I guess, a feeling that this is a Fed that's going to go September 18th. But now the question might be, should they maybe do a little bit more front-ended move here in interest rates, maybe take them down 50 basis points in a couple of weeks? What do you guys at TCW, what are you thinking?
Yeah, good morning, everybody, and thank you for bringing up Dick Hokinson's name, DLJ. We had it so good there until Credit Suisse came along.
Got that right.
Sorry.
Yeah. Look, my team here at TCW, first of all, I think it's, not the most important thing to debate whether they go 25 or 50, because it's most important thing is how it goes with the journey, over the next 18 months. But, how we see the world here, this whole thing, I know you guys know Ian Lindgren at BMO.
Yep.
He's one of our favorites. And I don't know if he's coined this, but he's used it a few times. So I think it's a good way to describe the current situation, which is that, a soft landing and a hard landing both feel the same on the initial descent. And, starting in late April, this economy started its descent. Everything started to slow down. And we've had some data here and there that, surprised to the upside, but generally speaking, May, June, July, and August, and now September, that the data has been coming in under expectations, and it's clearly signaling not only economy softening, but certainly a labor market that is softening. And then at the end of August, Powell came out at Jackson Hole, and he really just set the stage, and he made a huge dovish turn and basically told the world that the Fed feels like they have solved the inflation problem. And oh, by the way, 3-month PCE, their favorite target's running at 1.7%, so 30 basis points below their target. And he set this up, and they basically said, we're going to care now more about labor than we are about inflation. And then you get to last week, and you start out with a confirmation that U.S. manufacturing is effectively shrinking. It's in a recession. Then you had the job openings data come in much weaker than expected. You had ADP on Thursday. You had this employment report on Friday, and I've read different things. It seems a mixed report, this and that. From our perspective, the TCW, most important number is 116,000. 116,000 is the 3-month average of that headline number. And by the way, that's before an adjustment that we'll see next month to the August data. And 116,000 is not enough job growth, given the size of this economy and the rate of its expansion, to keep the unemployment rate flat. And basically, you need something closer to 150 to 175,000, and we got 116,000. So, from our perspective, you combine that with probably the most important but underreported piece of information last week, which was the Beige Book. So the Fed's own publication of its 12 districts about current economic conditions basically came in as bad as it can come. You don't really see books worse than that. And so if you've got Powell already in August saying we care about the economy, we care about labor, and you get all that information last week, it's hard to see how they don't go 50.
Right now, a Dow up 192 points, and SPX does better than futures. Futures are up 35, maybe 40. SPX up 46 points now. NASDAQ up a stick, 1%. The VIX comes in 1.53 points, 20.85. Brian, I just to impress myself, I tried to do a TCW chart, and I took the Bloomberg index. Good morning to the memory of Jack Melvey at Lehman. I took the Bloomberg corporate index back to the great financial crisis, blah, 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 log chart and all that. We've recovered from -6 standard deviations, almost out to -3 standard deviations. Is the least expected outcome price up, yield down on bonds, where we get back to that historic trend?
Yeah, I mean, this conference at 25 or 50, we have a Fed funds rate at 5.5%. Right. I mean, that is clearly in restrictive territory. There's debate about, what's R-starred, what's the neutral rate? Is it 2? Is it 3? But we have a long way to go. So even if you go 50, right, now you've got the top end of the range at 5%. Like, that is incredibly restrictive. And this economy, and when you think about, there's a argument out there, well, bonds have come a long way. By the way, the 1-year return on your bond funds probably somewhere between 8 and 9%. Not so bad for bonds, but still at these levels, with interest rates up kind of around, high 3s, almost 4%, is there more to go? Yeah. And the question we would ask the market out there is, well, does this feel like an economy, based upon current projections of where the funds rate's going to go, does this feel like an economy that can wait another 4 to 5 quarters, another 12 to 15 months just to get back to neutral? Because neutral, if this is truly entering a slowdown and possibly a recession, you don't end at neutral. at some point you got to give it the gas, which means you got to go below that neutral rate, which would be in a funds rate down into the low twos or even, with a 1-something%.
And Paul, no one is framing this out. I mean, I'm just looking at it on a chart basis and on our Jack Melvey and all he did at Lehman. But I'm sorry, Paul, we're not halfway back. We're 40% back to trend, which I'm taking from, I'll tell you, like it's a pandemic. Where's the mouse here?
Where's the mouse?
I got to pay the bill here.
That's why we talk
November
to
of 2021 was the bond.
Very good. Hey, Brian, smart people here like Lisa Abramowitz, they tell me to pay attention to this yield curve. Boy, it had been negative for a very long time, but now we've got some steepening. We got the 10 at 3.74%, the 2-year at 3.69%. Do I care about that?
Care very much about that. I mean, that's two things about an inverted yield curve, which is where we were. I mean, short end rates were higher than long end rates. One, people say it's a predictor of recession. The second thing, and we actually think is probably more or more accurate, which is it is a cause of a slowdown. It's a cause of recession. Basically, you cannot continue indefinitely to borrow at a higher rate than you get a return on the asset. It doesn't work. For a period of time, maybe while your assets are appreciating, that can work, but eventually that chokes off the economy. So the fact that it had been inverted for so long was part of headwind the economy is dealing with. Now that it's basically flat. I mean, I think it's plus 5 basis points, but still flat is not sustainable. And so what you should expect to see over time is that as the Fed reacts, as the Fed cuts, and it pulls down not just the funds rate, but it'll pull down treasuries like the 2-year treasury and the 5-year treasury. It'll pull it down, down, because they're anchored together. They're going to go up and down. And so eventually we will get to a normalized yield curve, which looks more like a positive 100 basis points plus or minus of a slope.
Very quickly here, Brian, Lisa Mateo's family wants to know which CD should they buy right now. What 1 year, 3 year, 5 year CD? Which one's most attractive?
I think you want to go out to probably 2s or 5s. So you want to lock today's yields in as long as you can for 2 reasons. One, we think it's going to be a long time before you see these yields again. And then 2, the longer you go out in the curve, the more price appreciation you get when rates start to drop. So your return will be best if you go further out.
Brian, thank you. Brian Whalen with the TCW, just brilliant. Can't say enough about his work. He's like Sebastian Page at T. Rowe Price. These guys just rock. They really give you.
But I avoided the fixed income floor every time I went to TCW. I just went right to the equity guys. I don't want to get anywhere near those fixed income.
Yeah, well, we should say this
is
too smart. Trust Company of the West, and it's very unknown. You go from the quarter 99.1 all the way up to Bloomberg 92.9 FM in Boston. People think there's no finance on the West Coast. You used to live out there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, San Francisco, Hambrecht and Quist, Robertson Stevens. Go down and see Amundsen in L.A.
There's some good money in San Diego as well. A lot of growth money down in San Diego.
Did you meet a lot with Gordon Crawford?
A lot, every time. Every time I could.
He tore you to shreds, right?
Oh, yeah, but he was all over it. And then he had a great team around him there at Capitol, so they had a heritage of these big media. I'd love to talk to Gordy now and see what are you making of what's going on.
What are you making a mess? John Malone and Gordon Crawford, we'll get them together next week. Dow up 258 points. With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
All right, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris heading into tomorrow night's debate with the latest New York Times Siena poll showing Trump ahead by just 1 percentage point among registered voters. Well, Nikki Haley was the last Republican to challenge Trump in the primaries. She says Harris is vulnerable tomorrow night.
You look at Kamala Harris, and it's quite remarkable. She never had a debate. She never had a primary. She never had anyone vote for her. And they basically took her, and in 48 hours, they put her back out there, and she was this whole new candidate.
Nikki Haley there was on CBS's Face the Nation, which can be heard Sundays on Bloomberg Radio. Following the debate, Harris plans to travel to key battleground states, including North Carolina, on Thursday. Our coverage of the ABC News presidential debate, that begins tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Wall Street time, on a special edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg Television. Republican lawmakers accuse the Biden administration of lying to Americans and sacrificing the safety of U.S. soldiers during the 2021 Afghanistan withdrawal. The accusation comes in a new report that seeks to implicate Vice President Harris before the election. It says President Joe Biden's team misled and in some instances directly lied to the American people at every stage of the Afghanistan withdrawal. And a gunman killed 3 Israelis at a terminal on Jordan's border with the Israeli-occupied West Bank on Sunday. It was the first such incident since the Gaza war began in October, straining ties between the Jewish state and Jordan. It's just a story so good, you got to keep doing it. A good Samaritan with a familiar name helped save a choking man at the Hampton Beach lobster roll eating competition in New Hampshire Sunday. Governor Chris Sununu was at the event. He says he was the first to notice the contestant having trouble breathing. The governor performed the Heimlich maneuver before first responders took over and helped free the stuck piece of lobster.
He went right back to the contest, which I couldn't believe. He ate another 7 lobster rolls after that, right down the gullet.
Governor Sununu speaking there to WMU. I mean, who wouldn't go back to eating lobster?
Yeah, but, public announcement, I'm an idiot because I don't know how to do that.
Oh, the Heimlich maneuver?
Yeah. I mean, I've never been trained to do it because I'm a lazy kid.
I thought you meant stuffing lobster
No,
rolls.
no, he knows that.
No, you're expert at that.
I go with the cold ones. Maybe they do the hot. But come on, everybody.
You have to know.
I will go learn how to do this.
Yeah.
Maybe downstairs.
Yeah.
The hospital they have downstairs.
Yeah, they're going to take it. They'll take care of you.
Well, if you happen to choke here, I know it, so I can help you.
Oh, there you go.
Well, I almost choked on Tang once.
Oh,
hey,
no.
program note: Austin Carr, Max Chafkin, killer. Bloomberg Business Week, the big take.
Check it out.
How Apple rules the world, and even better, it has a photo of the 2007 iPhone 1 that John Tucker still uses.
Very good. It's a great article.
Our coverage today: Bloomberg Technology, the Apple meeting. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks on the rise as dip buyers show up after last week's sell-off. The S&P 500 stopped a 4-day losing streak as buyers scooped up some bargains. The S&P 500 right now up 0.8%, 42 points. The Dow up 0.5%, but the Nasdaq up more than 1%, 172 points. We have the 2-year yield at 3.68%, up 2 basis points. A yield on the 10-year 3.72%, and that's up 1 basis point. To currencies, the dollar showing its strength strength. The Japanese yen weaker, down about 0.3%. The euro weaker, British pound weaker. We have Bitcoin right now up nearly 1% at 55,000. Shares of Boeing higher, up nearly 4%. A bit of optimism about avoiding a strike. The company reached an agreement with its largest union. And shares of Alphabet's Google up 1%. It's heading back to court today to face U.S. Justice Department antitrust allegations about its ad empire. And finally, cloud computing. It's really gotten a pretty good boost from artificial intelligence. Well, today we'll see how that pans out for Oracle when it reports quarterly results after the close. Oracle right now up about 0.1%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. We loved having her on last time she showed up with the University of Rochester, the Simon Business School. Seven Yeltikin joins us, Dean of Simon. Seven, there's a debate tomorrow night, and I think basically both candidates don't care what Seven Yeltikin thinks. Where did we get to the point where political teams, political candidates aren't listening to business people or economics people in academics?
I don't know how we got there, but we certainly have had a lot of pushback against expert opinion. And that is showing up in the kind of proposals that we're seeing, because a lot of them would make a trained economist quite wary and pessimistic about the outcomes. And that's a real problem. I think we've stopped talking about real policy in these debates, period, most of the time. It just seems to be a lot of drama with not really much emphasis on policy.
But who's ever elected, I think there's an inauguration in January, Paul.
Yep, well, we'll see.
Will there be cogent economic policy? Or, to borrow a phrase from Europe, or will there be bedlam?
I'm hoping that there will be cogent economic policy, whether we agree on the details or not. There seems to be a lot of emphasis right now about sort of taxes, taxes on especially capital gains, corporate tax rates. And of course, there's a lot of discussion around tariff rates as well. All of that, the rhetoric before the election happens versus what really gets proposed and, of course, gets passed tend to be somewhat different. Of course, we've seen that through many election cycles, but the devil is always in the details in these policies, and one has to take a holistic view. You move taxes in one side, let's say corporate taxes or capital gains tax. What does that do to the debt levels of the United States? All of that needs to be part of the discussion, and we're just seeing a lot of sound bites right now and not very comprehensive policy, design.
Professor, last week we had a lot of economic data capped by the labor jobs report on Friday. Putting that all together, how are you viewing this U.S. economy right here?
I've been always I think I've showed up in your offices and in Bloomberg multiple times, have been very optimistic about the U.S. economy. I think compared to a lot of industrialized economies or even some of the emerging economies, the U.S. economy has weathered the storm of COVID and all of the other geopolitical risks relatively well in terms of the growth. And a very tight labor market as well, bounced back really fast. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that there hasn't been pockets of course, weaknesses. And one of the places what there has been quite a bit of a strength has been the labor market in the United States. We've seen a very tight labor market. We've seen certainly wages go up. We've seen low unemployment rates. That's starting to soften a little bit. At least that's what the indicators are showing in the last sort of 3-4 months of both job creation as well as sort of wage growth. So we're starting to level out, I think. And I think while that doesn't, from my perspective, doesn't really signal a recession, it certainly does raise the probability of a beginning of, interest rate cuts significantly.
So I guess the market is fully discounting a rate cut here in a couple of weeks' time. How do you think the Fed will proceed going forward? Will it be consistent kind of meeting to meeting cutting by 25 basis points? Will they front load it? How do you think they will or should proceed?
I doubt, if I were a betting woman, I would say that I doubt they're going to front load it unless something really drastic happens between now in maybe the next or the second meeting in the cycle. But I do think that they will take a cautious view. They've been very cautious in raising the interest rates as we hiked up to 5.5%. And I think they will be cautious coming down as well, because while that would be welcome by especially the stock market and investors, it certainly could start fueling inflation again. So they have to be really cautious. We're not at a place where we have a lot of room to be cavalier about it.
Seven, we talked to Yurin Timir earlier, he of Babson, and of course how well Babson did in the recent college rankings soiree, I believe the Wall Street Journal. Seven, you guys have a phenomenal ROI ranking at the University of Rochester, and I'm going to say it centers on STEM MBA. What's a STEM MBA?
Well, we have a very data analytics and analytics or quantitative analysis-based MBA. We've always been a school that has been very heavily anchored in the sort of the economic theory, and added to that is a really careful sort of application of the scientific method. And when you think about STEM, you know, all of these sort of science, technology, and engineering and math, those are sort of the hallmarks of the type of education that we do deliver, which is very much, you know, it's not about, oh, let's study a particular case and let's get some learnings from it, but we don't know how to apply it to another case. That's a different case. We tend to take that scientific management science approach, which is take the data, take the models, break it down, try to solve the problems, and try to verify whether your approach would work. And that's the scientific method, and that's what really permeates through all of our programs, especially in our MBA program, and that's the STEM approach.
But when I gave a speech up there, the humility, folks, I grew up in Rochester, so I've got a little bit of an inkling from the distance from Jenny Creamale to New York. But, you know, I look at Lawrence Madison and the work he did at Eastman Kodak, and he's, I believe, teaching for you guys at Simon. How does the humility of the Kodak blow up affect your MBA program?
I think it's certainly, you know, when we think back, I think certainly, you know, when we think about market analysis, you know, I'm not an expert in sort of what happened exactly in Kodak, but certainly it seemed that they had missed the digital mark quite badly. And I think, you know, think about sort of what is the market research telling us, and how do we actually continually assess what the competition is doing, and what are the sort of the innovative technologies coming on board. I think it's especially a lesson in not resting on your laurels. It's a lesson that disruption comes in fast and furious and can come in a variety of formats, and from the smallest firms to the biggest corporate entities, you have to be alert and on your feet. One of the things we teach our MBA and our MS students is that this is a treadmill and you never get to get off of it. Innovation, if you do not innovate, if you do not keep up with market trends, it's a death sentence.
Seven, thank you so much. Seven Yeltikin joining us from the Simon Business School, Rochester. I can't say, Paul, enough how every school like Emory in Atlanta, et cetera, they have a culture and a character of the region and the place. And Simon is really hard-nosed because of the collapse up there of Eastman Kodak.
Right.
And
was that true? I mean, is that simply they missed the digital transfer, you know?
I could go on all day about this. I mean, Lawrence Madison lived at what was called Kodak Apparatus Division. But the answer is, it was a lot to do with digital. There's been a lot written about this. Dow up 337. Tomorrow night, our coverage begins at 8 p.m. The debate at 9 p.m. where they will disagree.